get the feeling you ain't ever met a monk before. Cause when this fight is over, you'll just be a lump on the floor. I got a mind of mercury, you never hurting me. Use my reaction, recognize your pattern, strike with certainty. Extorting any truth I wanna hear, you cannot lie when you speak. The only thing you'll hear from me is pop pop, then go to sleep. We walk the way of the cobalt soul, expositors, collecting information in forgotten ancient tomes. We work across the nations, keeping knowledge safe for others. If you need us, you can see us rocking blue and silver colors. Don't hurt me at all. Can run vertically up walls. Project astrally with my can built differently is all. Mystical erudition, proficiently skilled, got wisdom. Enlightened to learn all the secrets of soul can preserve is a part of my mission. Anybody can attest, the pursuit of knowledge is the best. And as long as there's mysteries out there, then the cobalt soul cannot rest. Pop pop.
both Empire kids, right?
Yeah.
More so than the rest of the 9?
Yeah.
What do you think about the Empire?
I mean, what?
About the crown?
It is what it is.
I think it's kind of bullshitty. Can we agree to keep each other straight?
How do you mean?
Let's just make a pact if either one of us do anything stupid that maybe we're each other's fail-safes.
Yeah, I like that. God, what if she has been lying to us?
And she fucking lied to us. And we take that and we learn that as a lesson for later on.
Want to gamble?
I'm not much of a gambler. If I can adjust her.
No, I'm not.
What?
This is a game we used to play.
What?
Put a question on the deck. Whoever draws the highest card has to answer it.
Wait, are these like playing cards or your tarot cards?
Tarot cards, so they got numbers.
You know I fucking hate those things.
No.
I don't want anything to do with them.
I'll throw one out there for you. What's the best lie you've ever told?
The best lie I've ever told.
I'll give you mine if you give me yours. Whoever gets the highest has to tell.
There was a politician in the town that I grew up and didn't like very much. Didn't like his wife either. Wanted to find some dirt on him. Figured out that they were cheating on each other and destroyed their relationships and their lives. Maybe I shouldn't be proud of that, actually.
No, I'm very impressed actually. You are a good friend to have and a terrible enemy to make.
Yeah. Anyway.
To not quite being the worst people. Cheers.
Cheers.
Night.
Moving on. And if I see any of your faces again, well, at least you'll be able to see your friend on the other side.
Fuck you, Lorenzo.
Fuck me.
Well, good morning. Hey, Lauren. How you doing? Good morning, Swiftness. I'm doing good, Lauren. Thanks.
What Molly said when he told us that you liked every town better than me. When he first told me that, I remember my first initial knee-jerk reaction was, "You fucking arrogant, narcissistic
The 31st,
bastard."
how is
Knowing you
August
fucking
over
know that.
already? My God.
He was an arrogant bastard, but he was right. And do you know how I know? We had a conversation last night. We were up for watch. And he asked me what my greatest lie was. And we did fucking cards for it. Loser was
I
the
am
first.
working from home today because if I come into the office, someone will not survive. Ooh. All right. So we are on chapter 8. Chapter 8, Wandering Ends. They remained... Oh, I left the music on, didn't I?
About
Yes. Chapter 8, Wandering Ends. They remained at the verge for some days while they waited for Kara to be fit enough to travel. In pairs they hunted to keep their food supply up, and they discovered that game in the area was good. It seemed the Weremage had kept the area free of humans, but she had not hunted the nearby prey down to nothing. On their third day at the stronghold, Flip proposed that they ransack the place for any remaining valuables. Any treasures from the stronghold's occupation seemed to have been looted long ago. Any treasures from the stronghold's occupation seemed to have been looted long ago, but there were several other corpses like the first one they had found, and some of them bore purses full of coin. Hey, what's up, Kiki Hot? Morning, Erica. All told, they assembled more than 30 gold weights. Flip and Oris insisted on giving the money to Kara, to which Sylvan easily assented. Kara demurely refused, but only once, and when they urged her again, she took the coins. Vale! I mean, considering, it depends on how radical you are in your politics, Vale. Because considering the fact that Bruce Wayne is a billionaire, that's basically the plot of Batman. On a day free from rain, they tended to a more somber affair, the burning of Ombi's body on a pyre. Oris, Flip, and Sylvan all cut wood for the bier. When it was done and Flip had wrapped Ombi in cloth gathered from the stronghold, Oris brought Kara outside for the lighting. They put flame to the wood, and there they waited until everything had burned down to embers. Oris tried not to stare at the others. Grief was a private thing if one was not invited to join in it, but she could not miss the shaking of Kara's shoulders as she wept. As the days went by, Kara grew stronger and became more active. The three of them fretted over her, trying to convince... The other three fretted over her, trying to convince her to rest, but Kara would not heed them. Soon she was up and puttering about their makeshift camp at the base of the tower. She cleaned the place as best she could, and she insisted on taking her turn cooking at least once a day. When a week had passed, Kara told them she was ready to travel. Well, 'cause Batman. Lauren, Batman. In fact, she all but demanded that they leave at once. Oris and Flip worried she was not yet strong enough for the road, but Kara gave them a steely look. I mean to leave this place, she said. Her voice had steadily been improving, though it held a rasp that Oris doubted would ever leave it. I wish to put it behind me and never think about it again. In the end, they were only able to convince her to stay one more day. The next morning, she was up before the rest of them, stowing her belongings in her pack. You cannot imagine we are going to let you carry that, said Flip indignantly. Kara raised her brows at him. I am not so frail as you seem to imagine, nor has my pack ever been as heavy as yours. Is that a real thing, Vale? Sylvan gave Oris a secret smile and then spoke. I believe Flip feels it necessary to make amends, said Sylvan. If we had been more vigilant, no evil might have befallen you. It would ease his conscience, I think, if you were to let him carry your things for you. Kara could hardly object to that, and so Flip and Oris divided her possessions between their packs. It gave Oris a new appreciation for how crafty Sylvan could be, soothing tempers and gently guiding others to behave as she wished. It was both alluring and concerning, for she could imagine Sylvan turning such tricks on her. They set out before midday. To no one's great surprise, Kara wearied before a full day's travel, and they made camp early. Oops, this is not Scrivener. But the next day they pushed a little farther, and a little farther still the day after that. Sometimes Oris grew concerned that the pace would be too much for Kara, but whenever she glanced at the lever, she saw her mouth set in a grim line, her eyes fixed determinedly on the horizon ahead. That's so crazy, Vale. Oh my gosh. Thus... Thus, in 3 days, they spied the walls of Drakman far ahead. Kara seemed ready to collapse with relief when she saw them, but she soldiered on and even increased her pace a bit. The city was built near the mouth of the Dragon's Tail. About a league away, they could just see the river churning as it spilled out into the Wormgraft Sea, the southernmost ocean that touched the lands of Underrealm. The city's walls were tall and thick and built of stone. There were no river gates, as there were in many cities farther up the river, including in Wellmont, where Flip and Horace's journey had begun. There were no water gates, as there were in many cities farther up the river, including in Wellmont, where Flip and Horace's journey had begun. The water here was simply too wide. There was no bridge to span it. Instead, a thriving system of ferries and barges conducted trade and passengers across the wide water. From midday on, the river became utterly clogged with watercraft scuttling between them and around the larger ships sailing upriver from the Wormgraft or down from the river to the sea. Drakman swore fealty to the King of Selvin, but its western end was firmly planted on the river's Dortian shore. Despite this somewhat tenuous position, it suffered no Dortian raids. A confluence of interests protected it. Drakman was the only place to cross the Dragon's Tail River for many leagues, and powerful merchants exerted their influence to keep it safe for caravans. And while the High King Enelin could not entirely stymie Dorsey's custom of raiding their neighboring kingdoms for glory and wealth, she could, by inference and hints, let it be known that certain places were of special interest to her, and thus spare them from such aggression. Drakman had enjoyed this protection almost from the moment Enelin had taken the throne years ago. Bats have no right to be that big? How big? Which bats are we talking about? Okay, where was I? Ba-ba-ba-bum. The guards at the wall hardly gave them a second glance as they passed inside. After everything they had learned in the past 2 weeks, Oris had a fleeting thought that the city should be drawn up against invasion. But no one here had ever heard of the necromancer. Oris was fighting a secret war that few knew about. She wondered how long that ignorance would last. The first thing they did within the city was find the local Lovers Guild to transfer Kara's contract. The patron of the house, a man named Lolan, studied Oris and Flip with deep disapproval as they recounted the tale of the Rustling Verge and the fallen weremage. Oh wow, I didn't export a new version. The first thing they did within the city was find the local Lovers Guild to transfer Kara's contract. Drakmund was a larger city than Wellmont had been, and its House of Lovers was appropriately grand. It had the customary blue door, but this one was ornamented with gold, and gold was its sensuously curved handle. Brilliant silver sconces hung to either side, and the candles in them shone light upon a bronze plaque overhead that bore an inscription. If troubles bring you strife and pain, now lay them here to be reclaimed, for when our skillful work has finished, once troubling thoughts shall be diminished. Pithy, said Flip, smiling up at it. We're here on a serious matter, Flip. Flip's smile died and he sighed as he looked at Kara. Her face was stony as she stared at the blue door. I know. Forgive me. The patron of the house, a man named Lolan, studied Oris and Flip with deep disapproval as they recounted the tale of the Rustling Verge and the fallen weremage who had killed Ombi. But his face softened when Kara lent her testimony and support. I witnessed their heroism firsthand, patron, she told him. Ombi and I were freezing nearly to death, and we urged them to fetch wood for a fire. They could have done nothing to save Ombi, but they went far beyond their vow to save me. Oris's cheeks flushed as Kara's gaze fell upon her. I owe them my life, and I will forever remember them with kindness and love. In the end, the patron agreed not to blame Flip and Oris for Ombi's death, but still he demanded a ransom of loss, a payment of 50 weights for the death of a lover they had sworn to protect. Again, Kara objected, offering some of the coin they had given her at the verge, but this time Sylvan spoke over her. I will pay the ransom without hesitation, she said, silencing Kara with a look. Ombi was of a special skill in his craft, and his life was cut short too soon. The guild is poorer for his absence, and the least I can do is compensate such loss with a meager payment of coin. She did not carry so much money on her person, but she delivered a note of obligation to Lolan. His brows raised ever so slightly, and he looked from the note to Sylvan with fresh intensity. She gave him the slightest of nods. Oris doubted that Flip had noticed the exchange, but she knew that Sylvan must have given Lolan a notice to recover the payment from the mystic order in the city. Before they left, Kara took Oris aside for a final farewell. You must send a letter every once in a while, she said. I am most intrigued to hear of your adventures. I promise that I will, said Oris, as often as I remember. More often than that, I hope, said Kara with a smirk. I would not be an afterthought in your saga. I will ask Sylvan to remind you every so often. I suspect she has a better memory for such things than you. Oris glanced over her shoulder to where Sylvan and Flip were waiting before her by the blue door. I don't know if I'll be by her side for too very much longer. Somehow I think you shall, said Kara. In any case, I hope you will visit again while you remain in Drakmund. I promise you shall never drop a single coin in this place. Oris smiled gently and ran a hand along Kara's arm. I'd never presumed to take for free any craft so skillful as yours. Kara smiled and then pulled her down for a parting kiss. It was the first time since they had met that Oris felt more passion than performance on Kara's part. Do not forget me, said Kara. I know that I shall never forget you. Chapter 9, Drakmund. Sylvan took them to an inn called the Jagged J towards the southern end of the city. It was clear she had visited before. The innkeeper, a thin reed of a Twix named Ash, greeted her by name, and they rented her a room without commenting on her companions. Oris noticed with some curiosity that Ash did not say anything about Sylvan being a mystic. She wondered if they knew not to mention it when she was not wearing her red cloak, or if they, like Flip, were not aware of the truth. Sylvan got them a modest room with 2 beds in it. We should remain wary while we are in the city, she explained when Flip and Oris looked at her askance. That means maintaining a watch. Only 2 of us will sleep at any one time. Flip groaned. I thought I might finally get to catch up on all the rest I missed on the road. You still can, said Sylvan, giving him a wry look. We will not be exploring the city or seeing the sights. We shall remain in this room as much as possible. Sleep as much as you want during the day, as long as one person is awake. That should give you ample opportunity to recover before my master reaches us. Is it truly wise to remain here if we're so fearful of discovery, said Oris. Shouldn't we go to your master instead? Journeying to a halfway point between us would speed our meeting considerably. It would, said Sylvan. I have been thinking much the same thing, but I do not know precisely where my master is or where he is traveling to, and moving openly across the land in search of him would only put you in greater danger. Enfil proved that. No, I think that our best course now is to remain here and wait for word to reach him. Fair enough, said Flip. He threw himself down on the bed, running his hands appreciatively over the bedclothes. So long as you're footing the bill, or your master is, I suppose, I have no complaints. I am glad to hear it, said Sylvan with a smirk, and now, if you will excuse me, I must go and send a letter to him, or we will wait in Drakmund a long time indeed. It was not long before the waiting became interminably dreary to all of them. Sylvan was stringent about her precautions. She did not let any of them wander the city. When they left for some necessity, at Flip's insistence, necessity included visits to the Lovers' Guild, they had to bundle up tight and wear masks along with their hoods. Oris, in particular, was never permitted to leave the J without Sylvan sticking close to her side. Hey, what's up, Bodegazilla? Ah, yes, Sparta. We should be much more like the Spartans. Find your closest male friend and bone him in the ass. Yes, exactly. Also, let us give all wives access to free and easy divorce with an equal share of all resources. And let us make that a cultural norm so well established that no one thinks to make even the slightest comment if a woman wishes to divorce her husband because he's a fucking asshole. Yes, indeed. Let us have all of the men be much more familiar with butt sex. so that we must say unto them, No, no, Patroclus, for the species to continue, you must go the other way. Alright, I gotta keep working. Their little room was uncomfortably intimate. They got themselves a deck of cards with which to play moons. When each of them stood their night watches, there was little else to do. But as Oris sat there, flipping cards back and forth across the wooden planks of the floor, she found herself getting distracted often. She would sometimes realize that she had been studying Sylvan's face for a while. Unlike Flip, who twitched and shifted through the night, the mystic woman slept like the dead. Whenever Oris caught herself staring, she scowled and turned away from the beds, trying to focus on the game. In time, she noticed them all falling into behavior that was more familiar than might be wise. They would bathe at the J or at the Lovers' Guild of Lovers, and at first Oris was somewhat self-conscious. But Sylvan cared no more for modesty than she had in the river, what felt like a lifetime ago, and as days became weeks, Oris's awkwardness melted away until she hardly even thought of it. Then, too, when they ate, always taking their meals in their rooms, Sylvan would sometimes she would sit on the bed by Oris, though either place was equally agreeable. Their knees might bump each other, or Sylvan's hand brush Oris as she reached for her pack. Oris's breath would hitch each time, but Sylvan did not seem to notice anything at all unusual. When Oris was on watch and she had to wake Sylvan, she would often pause, standing silently by the side of the bed, her hand hovering over the woman's arm. Then she would shake her head as if casting off a dream and wake Sylvan at last, telling her gruffly that it was her turn to stand watch. "You're being a fool," she told herself savagely, and each time as she fell asleep she tried to ignore Sylvan's lingering scent on the blanket and silence her thoughts long enough for sleep to claim her. But that did not stop her eyes or her attention from wandering where they would and lingering where they wished. It is about the yearning. Yep, there is that too. "I'm going to go and see if any reply has come," said Sylvan. It was the morning of their 15th day in the city. "If we are very lucky and the letter reached my master as quickly as possible, we might already have an answer. I assume I can trust you to remain here?" "Flip will, certainly," said Oris, her mouth twisting as she regarded the wizard. He had held the last watch overnight, and now he was collapsed face down on one of the beds, gentle snores wheezing from his mouth. "And I don't plan to go anywhere." "Good," said Sylvan with a smile. "I shall see you again soon." Oris's jaw clenched, and she nodded. Sylvan kept her expression carefully neutral until she was out of the room, but when the door closed behind her, she winced. "I shall see you again soon," she chastised herself. "You sound like a moonstruck youth." She forced her mind away from Oris, something that was becoming increasingly difficult as days went by. It was almost a relief to be out of the room, away from the warmth, the scent, the closeness, the sheer proximity that threatened to overwhelm her. As if that were possible, she thought savagely, as if you deserve it. As swiftly as that, and just like that, her thoughts had wandered again. This time she wrenched them back, digging her own nails into her palms to force herself to focus. She pulled her hood farther down. If the enemy had been preparing for this war, they would know of her master, Jordell. If they knew Jordell, they might know of her. She had no wish to be recognized by someone who could follow her back to Oris. She had chosen the Jagged J for a few reasons. First, Ash was a good sword and more trustworthy. Than most when it came to keeping secrets about their visitors. But more importantly, the Jagged J was in the city's southern quarter, as far as possible from the city's mystic stronghold. The last thing she needed was to have someone in her order accidentally reveal her to Flip. As a consequence, it took her almost an hour to reach the stronghold, the journey made even longer by the fact that she avoided busy streets wherever possible and stuck to secluded alleys and the passages between buildings. At least it was early enough that the river was not too busy. She secured herself a small ferry, little more than a rowboat, and sat huddled against the railing, her arms wrapped around herself while the farrier rowed her across. Earn as you yearn. Stillness made her thoughts wander and also gave her an excuse to let them. Oris had taken the first watch last night, and Sylvan had taken the second. When Oris had come to wake her, she had first sat on the bed, and that had woken Sylvan. When Oris had come to wake her, she had first sat on the bed, and that had woken Sylvan. But she kept her eyes closed and controlled her breathing so that Oris would think she was still asleep. For a long while, Oris had not moved. Sylvan wondered why. What was she looking at? What was she thinking of? Was it possible that she was studying Sylvan in slumber, as Sylvan sometimes caught herself doing to Oris when she was on watch? "Why do you torture yourself?" she thought. "Even if it were true, it could never lead anywhere. You could never let it." With a gentle thud, the boat struck the dock on the northern shore. Sylvan blinked twice as her thoughts returned to the present. She set off into the streets, once more forcing herself to think only of the here and now, watching carefully for anyone who took undue notice of her, but no curious eyes shadowed her steps. "All right, Swiftness, have a good one. Thanks for dropping by." In a short while, she came upon the Mystic Stronghold. It was an impressive structure built on a sizable hillock from which one could see the entire city laid out like a blanket of lamps and lights. The keep was a good deal larger than even the mayor's manor. The red cloaks who dwelled within it were another reason Druckmann did not face any Dortian aggression. Dorsey's King June was a warmonger, but he was no fool, and he had no wish to anger the mystics by endangering any of their soldiers. The guard at the gate was new, or at least new to Sylvan. She showed her badge. The guard made Sylvan pull down her mask to get a good look at her face. "Who are you here to see?" she said. The guard spoke in sign, asking Sylvan to pull down her mask to get a good look at her face. "Who are you here to see?" signed the guard. "Albert, the master of letters," signed Sylvan. "I shall have to send word, of course. You may wait inside the gatehouse." Sylvan accepted the offer gratefully. Winter continued to advance, and the air had grown bitterly cold. Soon a messenger returned from the keep, and the guard waved Sylvan inside. The stronghold was a bustle of activity. Messengers ran back and forth, popping in and out of doors like bees in a hive. Soldiers drilled in the baileys, some of them obviously fresh recruits. There was no conflict now that required the mystics to commit their own soldiers, but the order prided itself on always being ready. "Only in watchfulness lies safety." Those were the mystic's words, and Jordell repeated them to Sylvan often. But he had also taught her that there was a difference between ready to fight. He had also taught her that there was a difference between being ready to fight and being clever enough to stave off a fight before it began. He believed that the latter was the better choice, and he had instilled the same belief in Sylvan, hence their mission to find the Lifemage and protect her, even when most in the Order knew little about it and cared less. Sylvan remembered the way to Albert's office from when she had been here on the first day, and she wasted no time in reaching him. Her brisk knock was answered by his deep voice rumbling, "Come," from inside. She entered and closed the door behind her before casting back her hood and pulling down her mask. "Captain," she said, saluting with her hand over her heart. "Sister Sylvan," said Albert. He was a portly man, an unusual trait among the Red Cloaks, but then most of them did not spend their days at a desk, managing and speeding the flow of information from all 9 kingdoms. The top of his head was bald, but his fringe was all lustrous black curls, which he kept neatly trimmed along with his impressive beard. "I hardly thought it would take so long to see you again. I hope you have remained safe here in the city." "I have." His eyes narrowed. "I hope also that you have stayed out of trouble." A slight smirk twisted her lips on instinct, but then she thought of Oris, and the smirk vanished. "Of course." He said, his eyes returning to the papers on his desk. He lifted one, and Sylvan's heart leaped, thinking it was what she sought, but he only turned it over and began to scrawl on the back. "Well, of what service may I be? I came to see if any word had arrived for me." He looked up at her from under his brows, his beard twisting as he frowned. "Word from whom?" Her temper flared along with her nostrils, and she fought to quell her anger. Control, she thought. 2 deep breaths. 1, 2. From Captain Jordell of the family Adair. Albert dropped his quill and clasped his hands together on the desk. "And why in the dark below would you think I would have a word from him?" "Because," said Sylvan, trying hard not to sound condescending, "I sent a message for him a week and a half ago, through you." The captain tilted his head slightly, his eyes growing hard. "Let us be clear in our terms, sir. You did not send word to Jordell of the family Adair. You sent letters to our kindred in Wellmont, in Redbrook, in Cabras, and in Garsec, and that is because, as I told you last time, Jordell has been banished from the Mystic Order, and he is currently a fugitive from the King's justice." Sylvan's pulse was racing now. Control yourself, she thought. He would be disgusted to see you so close to losing your head. And I told you then, Captain. She forced herself to stop and swallow her anger. I apologize, but as I assured you, Jordel's banishment was a mistake. It will be sorted out, and soon. Will it really? Said Albert, his bushy brows shooting high. I fail to see how. New word has reached us since last you were here. Our brethren tried to arrest Jordel north of Welmont. He killed 2 mystics with his own blade. For a moment, all Sylvan could do was stare at him. Her throat was dry, and her limbs did not seem to want to answer her will. North of Welmont? When? I was so close. Could I have joined him? But no, she had to think of Oris now, not her regrets. The captain would have had good reason, she said at last. He must have. Careful, growled Albert. That sort of talk draws dangerously close to treason. I had heard good things about Jordel, and I understand the loyalty of a knight for her captain, but with those 2 added to the tally, he is now responsible for the deaths of 7 of our own. If you are wise, you will return to wherever you were stationed before you came here and seek new orders from whoever is next in your chain of command. That is Chancellor Cal, and I am still acting on his orders, said Sylvan, lifting her chin slightly. I gave you his writ last time. Hey! Thanks for the cheer, Lady Wrights. Much appreciated. But your concern is noted, and I suppose I ought to be grateful for it. And yet you still do not wish to send a letter to the Chancellor, said Albert. That is correct. You might understand why that would confuse me. I suppose I must understand it, snapped Sylvan, for in your case I am sure confusion is easily accomplished. She whirled on her heel and stormed out of the room, leaving the door open behind her and ignoring Albert's angry cry. Several mystics gave her as she stalked through their midst and back out into the city streets, but she refused to meet their eyes. Jordel will sort it out, she thought. He will. I only have to wait. But such was her agitation that she forgot to raise her hood or don her mask. Were she less distracted by thoughts of her master, she might have noticed a constable who suddenly seemed to take great interest in her, and who began to tail her through the city. He followed her all the way back to the south quarter and watched as she stepped within the Jagged J. Ah, what the hell? Why are you open? What the hell? When Sylvan left the J, Oris sat on her bed and watched Flip snore. Her fingers kept playing with the amulet, no matter how she tried to stop them. After Sylvan had been gone a while, Sylvan stretched her leg across the space between the beds and kicked Flip gently. Wake up, she said. Liz, he complained. His eyes opened slowly, and he blinked. What do you want? To talk, said Oris. It's rare we get a chance to speak alone anymore. Flip smacked his lips as he sat up and ran his fingers through his hair. You exaggerate, he said. Sylvan is asleep whenever we trade watches. You could talk to me then rather than waking me up now. That's hardly the right time or place for secrets. The way she sleeps, she could be faking it, and we'd never be able to tell. Flip frowned at her. What secrets do you have to discuss? Oris sighed, leaning forwards and clasping her fingers under her chin. Nothing nefarious. It's not some hidden knowledge I wish to keep from her, but I want to talk about all this without her leaning over my shoulder. Talk away, said Flip, but I doubt I have any answers to ease your mind, so you might as well have just talked to me while I was asleep. Behold the jester, said Oris, glaring at him. How easily the joke comes to one who's not at the center of all this. Where else should the jokes come? Where else would jokes come from? There's a reason kings keep jesters instead of trying to entertain themselves. Flip leaned back on the bed and put his hands behind his head. You need me to stop your mouth from going too sour, or you'll soon be too puckered to eat. Oris sighed and shook her head. I don't know about any of this, Flip, she said. Something about it is off. We've been here too long. When Sylvan first met us, she acted like her mission was more urgent than anything. Now we just hang about. I'm half afraid that I've forgotten how to use my sword. I imagine you'll remember quickly when someone's trying to take your head off, Flip said mildly. But why aren't we doing anything, said Oris. What if this is all some trick or some scheme to trap us? What if nothing Sylvan said was true? Flip's hand rose to absently rub his chest through his golden tunic. Sylvan might be lying about some of it, he said quietly, but it's not all a trick, Oris. We know that because of Welmont. That silenced her. Oris watched dust motes play in the shaft of light coming through the curtains over the window. Pew, 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 pew. Sometimes I novel. Greetings. Welcome to the stream. Feel free to grab yourself a free book at the link I just dropped in chat. That'll get you a free ebook copy of my book, Nightblade, the first book of Underrealm. It'll get you nice and addicted so that you want to go read all the rest of them. But you're going to enjoy the experience. So, you know, there's worse things to be addicted to. That silenced her for a while. For a moment. Oris watched dust motes play in the shaft of light coming through the curtains over the window. I always wanted to know more about myself, Oris said, nearly whispering. I didn't think the answer would be that I was meant to save the world. Flip spread his hands in a helpless gesture. It is as I told you, dear. It's as I told you, dear. You can't change what is. Nor how everyone else feels about it, nor how they react to it. You can only decide what you will do. If I were you, I'd sail upon that wind for all it's worth. Oris frowned. What do you mean? Flip looked at her, smiling slightly. What do you mean, what do I mean? Oris, according to some very powerful and very wealthy people, you've become the most important person in the world. You could hardly ask for a better position of strength. You can have status, money, just about anything you want. I don't want any of those things, said Oris. Then give them to me. I fucking love these people so much. Oris scowled. I only want answers. And who are you to give me such advice? Your family could give you all those things, yet you spurn them. Flip's light mood evaporated. I've told you of my family. It wouldn't be worth the price they'd extract from me. His frown eased slightly. But you don't face the same burden. You're privileged by birth like me, but without any of the dark legacy to stain you. Sky above, I wouldn't be surprised if you end up meeting the High King. Oris shook her head like she was warding off a fly. She stood from the bed. I'm going to get some food and the strongest drink they've got. Your bodyguard will be cross with you for leaving the room unattended, said Flip in a sing-song voice. She can tell me that herself, said Oris gruffly. Hey, thanks for the follow, Nuclear Stool? Stula? I'm sorry for butchering your name. But I can spell it. Grab yourself a free book at the link I just dropped in chat. That'll get you a free copy of Nightblade, first book of Underrealm. Get you nice and addicted so that you want to read the rest of them. Your bodyguard will be cross with you for leaving the room unattended, said Flip in a sing-song voice. She can tell me that herself, said Oris gruffly. She remained in the common room for some time. She chose a table in the back corner of the room, out of sight of the front door, and she pulled her hood up despite the heat of the bright hearth. Ash brought her some food and a bottle of strong mead they said they had been saving for the right customer. Oris made her way happily through it. A while later, Sylvan entered and almost walked straight by. At the last moment, she stopped beside the table, looking at Oris with wide eyes. Oris looked up at her from under the hood and arched a brow. I suppose you wish to tell me that I'm a fool. Suppose you wish to tell me that I'm a fool for sitting out here, she said, her words slurring only slightly. Sylvan heaved a deep breath. It's all right, she said. It is all right, she said. It is? Said Oris incredulously. Well, no, said Sylvan. We should not make a habit of it. It's fine, Oris. It's fine? No, it really isn't. Don't do that. We should not make a habit of it, but you cannot imagine you're the only one bored to death of that room. To Oris's surprise, she pulled up a chair and dragged the platter towards her. It still held a good portion of a roast chicken that Ash had brought, and now Sylvan tore into it. Oris studied her in silence for a moment. Sylvan, are you all right? She said. Of course, said Sylvan, not meeting her gaze. Why would I not be? Liar! All right, I'm going to go refill my coffee, and then I will be right back, and we will dive into Chapter 10. BRB. Ugh. Okay. Ugh. Chapter 10, Blades at the Jagged J. When the news came, the Lord was in his study, conferring with the attendant. They were staring together at the Lord's map, discussing where Oris could have gone. Would it not at least be wise, my lord, to send some agents into the land beside the river to seek them out, said the attendant. They may have tried to fade into the wood, rather than making for a settlement. They may have, said the Lord, but we do not have enough forces to search all the wilderness. Besides, they can do nothing of value there. Only when this mystic woman tries to unite the Lifemage with the rest of the Red Cloaks will she. Suddenly he stopped, looking off in another direction as though distracted. The attendant studied him closely. Several long moments of silence passed. When the Lord turned back to the attendant, he was wearing a small smile. Drakmund. She is in Drakmund. One of our agents there recognized the mystic woman. Drakmund, said the attendant. How long ago was she seen there? 2 days ago, said the Lord. They are at an inn called the Jagged J. It seems they have been there for some time. It may be imagined they will remain there for some time longer, but we cannot be certain. We must act quickly. Of course, Lord, said the attendant. Which of our agents is nearest the place? But almost before he had finished speaking, his expression soured. The Lord chuckled. Yes, my son. Of my favorite children, Beric is closest to the city. I suppose you had better send him then. Oh, come now, the Lord chided. He is more than capable. Of course he is, said the attendant, bowing his head. You may send whoever you wish, Lord. I shall now withdraw so that you may confer with him in private. In a blink, the attendant was gone. The Lord bowed his head, and his eyes began to glow. My son. Beric's head snapped up. He saw the Lord as if he were standing right there in Beric's chamber instead of many leagues away. A surge of anger rose in Beric's breast, but he quelled it. Father? Beric got out of his chair to fall to one knee and bow his head. Why do you honor me by visiting? Because, my son, said the Lord, your great desire is at hand. I am granting the request you made of me. Barrick's head snapped up. His body had gone rigid, and he could feel tiny quivers deep in each limb. His body had gone rigid, not a euphemism. The Lifemage? Yes, said the Lord. We have found her. She is still a good march away, that no one else is closer than you. Barrick gave a conniving smile. You knew, Father, did you not? Is that why you sent me here? To be ready? The Lord's beatific expression dampened. I did not, my son. We thought she would travel west or north, but fortune smiled on you, it seemed. Barrick's smile did not waver. If you say so, Father. Tell me where she is, and she is as good as dead. I will slaughter her and send you her head to celebrate our victory. Patience, said the Lord. You will find her in Drakmund, at an inn called the Jagged J. But you must be careful, my son. Enfil was incautious, and it took his life. Above all, you must not go alone. Bring as many of your siblings as you have with you, and any others you can summon quickly. But Father, growled Barrick, that will take time. We cannot let her slip away. It is worth it to ensure your success, said the Lord. This is my command. Barrick hesitated only a moment, but then he bowed his head. Very well, Father, I will not fail you. I believe you, my son. Make me proud. The Lord vanished. Barrick leaped to his feet and stormed out of the room to begin his preparations. 4 weeks had passed, or 40 days. The mystic woman surprised him, for she knew of my gift and how to remove it. You must guard yourself against her, and above all, you must not go alone. Bring as many of your siblings as you have with you, and any others you can summon quickly. 4 weeks had passed, or 40 days, and Oris had grown so bored that she was ready to burn the Jagged J to the ground just for a bit of excitement. Sylvan went into the city seeking her master's reply once every few days, leaving Oris and Flip alone. But no word came, and Sylvan grew more and more agitated. Flip still insisted on occasional visits to the Blue Door. Oris accompanied him on most of his trips, but she went for the change of scenery as much as for the company. Sylvan would come along, shadowing Oris like a bodyguard. She never took a lover herself, but always waited in the front room until Oris was done, a reasonable time, and Flip as well, much longer. On the last day of the fourth... On the first day of the 5th week, they were waiting for Flip once again. Oris had ordered a bottle of wine, which an attendant had swiftly fetched for her. Now they sat in the front room, trying not to become too distracted by the parade of beauty all around them. As was her wont, Sylvan did not partake of the drink. Do you think your master has received your message? Said Oris, leaning close to speak quietly. Sylvan leaned in closer as well. Oris's pulse quickened. I cannot know, said Sylvan, but if he has not already, it is only a matter of time. The mystics will reach him whenever he next joins their company. How long do you mean to wait? Said Oris. Isn't there anything we could be doing? I'm ready to throw myself in the river from all this inaction. Can we not turn to any of the other mystics here in the city? Or even in another city, so long as we know where they are and can go to them? We cannot for 2 reasons, said Sylvan. She stopped for a moment as a pair of young men walked over with inviting smiles. She gave them a polite shake of her head, and they bowed as they retreated. For 2 reasons, she repeated. First, as soon as Flip sees a red cloak or a badge, we will have precisely 1 chance to convince him to stay. I know of no one but Jordell who could make the case and manage to convince him. That doesn't make you sound very sure of your own argument, said Oris with a scowl. Say not that I doubt the importance of our mission, said Sylvan, but rather that I know the depth of Flip's hatred of my order. Fine, said Oris, but you said there were 2 reasons. What is the other? Sylvan glanced over her shoulder. I am not entirely certain who among my fellows I can trust. Oris's eyes shot wide. What do you mean? I thought you... She stopped herself just in time and lowered her voice. I thought you Red Cloaks were supposed to be my personal army or what have you. Her expression curdled. Yes, said Sylvan, but most of our order is ignorant of that fact. They will only be told once the Lord Chancellor of our order has confirmed to his satisfaction that you are who you are. Then the truth shall be revealed, but not before. And in the meantime, we must tread with all possible caution, even in excess of caution. If the enemy has been preparing for this conflict for years, or even decades, as it seems he has been, then his smartest move would be clear, to infiltrate the mystics with as many of his agents as he can. I know no one in the city. I do not know who I can and cannot trust, but Jordell has been gathering his strength for many years, and gathering as well a list of those he can rely upon. What is more, he will know how to train you, to help you unlock the magic that makes you who you are, so that you may face the necromancer on even footing. Oris looked at her incredulously. How does he know such things? He seems to know most things, quipped Sylvan. It has been his life's work. That's definitely Jordell. He commanded me to secrecy, and because of his great wisdom I continue to obey that command. He does not even wish to reveal you to the High King until you have come into your power. Oris sighed and leaned back, cracking her shoulders as she stretched her arms across the soft couch she was on. Fine, she said, so long as he doesn't take too much longer. Once we leave, I mean never to visit Drakmund again if I can help it. Just then a curtain of beads drew back, and Kara stepped into the lobby. Oris rose to her feet at once, and Sylvan did the same a moment later. Kara came traipsing lightly over to them, flashing bright teeth and a delighted smile. Oris's eyes ran over her body. Though the scars at her chest and neck stood out pink against her dark skin, she moved easily and without any sign of pain. A wonderful bodice wrapped around her neck and covered most of the scarring, wrapping down her front and around her waist, sheer enough to tantalize. Below it she wore a sarong tied loosely at the side of her waist, the slit revealing the length of her supple leg. Her feet had only thin, dainty sandals, easily discarded. "You are back," she said. "And you look sky-kissed," said Oris. Kara gave a throaty laugh and stood on tiptoe to cover Oris's lips with her own. "Then now we both are. What are the two of you doing out here in the front room?" "I'll give you 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count," said Oris. "Waiting for dear Flip," said Kara. "You know he hardly avails himself of his lover's services while he is here. Mostly he lounges about drinking and chatting with him for hours." "It is good to know I am paying so highly for such a thing," said Sylvan wryly. "I shall have to have a talk with him." Carol laughed again, then she placed a hand on Oris's arm. "If you really are just sitting here waiting for him, I could think of better ways to spend your time." A grin crept along Oris's lips before she could stop it. "Are you not still healing?" Kara ran her fingers lightly to Oris's elbow and back up again. "The healers call me tender, but I think I am stronger than they guess. Maybe you could help me prove it." Oris stuck her tongue in her cheek, but then she grew thoughtful. She looked to Sylvan. "I suppose you would rather I stay?" Sylvan was silent a moment, and then she shrugged. "Why would I? You know Flip. We will be here a while, and I do not think you are in any danger behind the blue door. And I shall take her up on her offer." Sylvan gave a smile, but Oris thought there was a bitter undercurrent to it. "Fine, but when Flip is done, we are leaving, and I will drag you back out here if I must." Oris returned before too long. A considerable amount of time later, Flip joined them, and they set out into the city once more. As she usually did, Sylvan insisted they pull up their hoods and mask themselves. "Must we?" complained Flip. "It draws more stares than if we simply walk openly." "More folk might notice us," said Sylvan, "but if we are masked, even if an observer thinks we look strange, still they do not know who is behind the cloth." Flip grumbled and did as she said. Despite her boredom with the place, Oris had to admit that Drakmund was beautiful in the golden hours of dawn and sunset. Now, with the sun sinking close to the horizon, everything had begun to take on a soft golden glow. There was nearly always a fine mist from the river. It made dark colors darker and bright colors glisten. Oh, such fucking yearning. That is what this book is. It is 85% yearning, 25% best friendship, and 0% math. There was nearly always a fine mist from the river. It made dark colors darker and bright colors glisten. The air was always crisp and clean, with just a hint of salt from the wormgraft not far away. Drakmund was in some ways the most unique city she had ever visited, and she might not have despised it so if she was not always trapped at the inn. It lay on the border of Selvan and Dorsey, and it was also quite close to both Wadeland to the east and Hedgemund to the south, only a few days' travel in either direction by the King's Road. Because of this, other intelligent creatures than humans could be found in the city. Folk who Flip said were called the awakened folk in academic circles. She had seen some centaurs walking the streets, shorter than most humans, their lower bodies like the hindquarters of a very large goat. Some moved purposefully and were clearly familiar with the city. Others seemed to be visitors, and they looked at the buildings and wagons in astonishment, particularly any carts drawn by horses or mules. Some headish merchants rode with hobs beside them on the driver's bench. The little creatures were so gnarled and rough that they looked like children's dolls stitched together from aged, stained leather. Their large eyes were squinted, bright and glistening, and they peered suspiciously at anyone who drew near their humans' wagons or wares. Also accompanying some of the heddens were creatures that Sylvan said were called Rockies. These were something like the trolls of the north, but more leathery like the hobs. Though they were uniformly hunched in their posture, still they loomed at 3 paces tall. Oris thought that if they straightened, they might rise to 4 paces or higher. Even more than the pleasures of the Lovers' Guild, these walks through the city were the main reason she always came with Flip. She longed to be on the road again, wandering and walking and seeing, not spending week after week cooped up in a cramped bedroom. Sylvan was more than generous with her coin, but that only made Oris feel like a prisoner in a golden cell. "Sylvan, I've been thinking," she said. "We must be able to go somewhere that we can be reasonably certain is closer to your master. Do you not even know a general direction?" "But Drakmund is so welcoming," said Flip. His mask obscured his frown, but Oris could hear it in his voice. "Why would you wish to abandon its hospitality?" "I want more freedom than the walls of the Jay," said Oris. "That freedom would bring danger with it," said Sylvan. The enemy will not send only a few fighters after us next time, and in the wilderness they will be harder to avoid." "It will be no easier to survive them here," said Oris. "Imagine if they all burst in the door of our room. We will not be able to cut our way out." "Then I will simply throw myself through the window," said Flip. "Oh, do not scowl at me so, Oris. Of course I would pull you out with me." "Then I'll simply throw myself through the window," said Flip. "Oh, don't scowl at me so, Oris. Of course I'd pull you out with me. Sylvan can stay behind for a desperate last stand, giving us time to escape." Oris and Sylvan had to laugh at that. And as they laughed, they turned to look at each other, and gradually they both fell silent. They were walking close enough that sometimes their arms brushed each other as they swung back and forth. Each time Oris felt the thrill of it even through the cloth of her cloak and Sylvan's sleeve. Oris found herself wondering at the bitterness she had seen in Sylvan earlier. There was no sign of it now, only Sylvan's shining eyes above the mask, glowing as if with an inner light, like Flip when he cast his spells. And then Oris realized that Sylvan's eyes were glowing, or rather they were reflecting a glow from Oris's chest. Her amulet was alight. "Dark below," cursed Oris as the crystal grew burning hot. She lifted it away from her on the leather thong. "Oris," cried Sylvan in alarm, "what is that?" Flip was staring at her wide-eyed. "Oris," he said, "does that mean—" Oris scarcely heard them. A feeling overwhelmed her, an utter emptiness, a void deep within her that gave her vertigo. She closed her eyes and pressed the heels of her hands into them, trying to dispel the sensation, but it would not go away. She opened her eyes and looked to Sylvan. "Sylvan," she said, "my amulet has never done this before in my life. Never until that day in the breeze boughs when Enfil and his lackeys found me." Sylvan's eyes widened. Then she seized Oris's arm and hauled her into a run. "Get to the Jay," she said. "We get our packs and we leave at once. Damn me twice for not getting us horses." Luckily, they were only a few streets away now. They sprinted the whole way there, Flip lagging slightly behind. They burst in through the front door and ran for their room, ignoring Ash's startled cry. "Southgate," gasped Flip between heavy breaths as he collected his belongings into his pack. "I do not know," said Sylvan. "They could be watching it." "They may be watching any of the gates," said Flip. "Sylvan," said Oris, "if you had to guess where your master was, where would it be? That's where we should go." Sylvan nodded slowly, her eyes wide but not looking at Oris. Yes, I think you are right. North, then. That means we shall have to cross the river." "It took a while for Enfil to reach us in the breeze boughs," said Oris. "We may have time." But that hope died the moment they burst back out the front door of the Jagged Jay. There on the street before them were arrayed a squadron of foes. They wore plain clothing, but just as last time, Oris spotted flashes of blue and light gray among them. There were at least a dozen of them. Slowly they circled around to surround the doors of the Jay. The door. Slowly they circled to surround the door of the Jay. At their head was a man who dwarfed everyone else there, wrapped so thick with muscle and armored so heavily that he was like a walking tree shrouded in iron. He was young, Orissa was surprised to see. She would have guessed he had not yet reached his 20th year, but his eyes were filled with the malice and scorn of a much older man. In his fist was a blade that would have been a greatsword in Flip's hands, but which he wielded in one. On his arm was a tower shield that was nearly as tall as Sylvan. He wore a half-helm that left his face exposed, and Orissa saw a small skirt of chain on the back of it, protecting his neck. A tattoo, she realized, like Enfil. The yawning pit in her stomach seemed to swell in size and then deepen. There she is, cried the leader. Kill her companion. The Lifemage is mine. Oris, go, cried Sylvan, leaping in front of her and Flip. The leader turned his vicious sneer on Sylvan. Your sacrifice will mean nothing when I... Oris threw her dagger. It plunged into the man's neck up to the hilt. His eyes widened. He choked, blood pouring from his lips. With a great crash, he sank to his knees. Oris just... one of my favorite things about Oris, which has been a constant trait in her ever since I first came up with this story, is, like, she just doesn't give a fuck. Like... You know, the whole, like, oh, honor in the fight and everything like that. She's, no. She goes for the nuts. She'll sneak. She'll, you know, hide a dagger behind her back, slip it into your ribs when you're not looking. It's just like, I'm here to fight, which means I'm here to win. Oh, you're distracted? Shank, 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 shank. Yeah, no hesitation. Commander Barrack, cried one of the shades. Barrack, thought Oris, at least we have a name. But then Oris sensed something. A wretched and evil glow seemed to swell around the man. It was centered on his neck. Barrack reached up to drag Oris's dagger from his throat. Immediately the flesh there began to stitch itself together. The other shades had stood staring in horror when Oris's dagger struck their leader. Now Flip took advantage of their distraction to loose a bolt of flame straight for Barrack's face. But the fire wisped away to nothing a hand's breadth away from him. Dark ticket, said Flip. Mip, the rest of you. A bolt of lightning shot from him, arcing for one of the other shades, but... but one of them raised her hands. Her eyes glowed, and Flip's bolt fizzled and died in midair. The woman swung her hands in a spell of her own. Oris saw nothing, but Flip folded his hands, and the light died in the woman's eyes. Excuse me. A mind mage, said Flip, gritting his teeth as his magic battled with hers. The mind mage, said Flip, gritting his teeth as his magic battled with hers. We have to run, said Oris. You go, said Sylvan. I will do what I can to hold them off. Oris gave an exasperated snort. Dark take you for a fool, she said out of the side of her mouth. You can't sacrifice yourself. We need you. We don't know where to go or even who your master is. If you die, we won't even be a day behind you. You shall be fine, said Sylvan. You can... Oris seized Sylvan's arm and yanked her towards one end of the half-circle of enemies. The shade who stood there was not expecting the charge, and he fumbled with his sword as Oris rushed him, screaming at the top of her lungs. Her sword leaped up to slice his throat open, and he fell to the ground, gushing blood. They fled between the members of the rapidly dispersing crowd that was now trying to flee the fighting. Oris was grateful that Sylvan did not try to remain, but ran along with the two of them. Flip kept having to spin around and slap down the spells of the pursuing wizard. She's not as strong as me, but she doesn't need to be, he said as he ran by Oris's side. She just needs to distract me so one of her friends can gut me again. Sylvan looked at him sharply. Again? Flip glared at her. I mean gut me. Dark take you, woman. I'm fighting for our lives. The shades were in hot pursuit, risking a glance over her shoulder. Oris saw that Barrack had recovered. The other shades had a head start on him, but he was terrifyingly fast, and he was beginning to pass the stragglers at the back of the group. They reached the river. For one moment, Oris hesitated, but Sylvan turned a hard right and kept running along the docks. Flip and Oris followed her. The water was clogged with ships, all muddling about and trying not to crash into each other. We have to get across, cried Sylvan. We have no time to hire a ferry, said Flip. Stall them or lose them, said Oris. How do you propose? I said Flip. That will do, cried Sylvan. Oris did not realize what she was talking about until she stopped just next to a small herd of centaurs. 6 of the creatures were wandering along the dock and looking avidly at all the sights. Sylvan drew her blades. For a horrible moment, Oris thought she would attack the creatures. Instead, she merely clanged the steel together and gave a great cry. Flip took his cue from her and sent a small flame bolt to explode a pace behind them. The centaurs reared, screaming. When they came down, they galloped away down the dock. They careened headlong into the shades, who either threw themselves out of the way or were swiftly bowled over. A few of them leaped or were knocked into the river, where they vanished beneath the water with panicked cries. Flip and Sylvan did not stay to observe their handiwork, but merely kept running. Not nearly enough of them, said Flip. At least it gives us a moment to think, said Sylvan. A moment is all you have, said Oris. She had looked behind them to see Barrack had now outpaced all his fellows, and he was quickly closing the gap between them. Flip was wheezing hard now. Oris was worried his pace might begin to flag. We may have to go south, he gasped. A ferry will be our doom. South is useless, growled Sylvan, but you may be right. The river is so packed we would be easy targets. Flip skidded to a stop on the dock. Oris and Sylvan did the same a moment later, looking at him like he had gone mad. Mayhap they were right, for Flip wore a terrifying grin. The river is packed, he said, laughing. Oris's eyes widened. You mad fool. What in the dock are you two? Oof! Sylvan's cry cut off as Oris scooped her up around the waist and leaped off the dock beside Flip. There are scenes in this fucking book that I can see so goddamn clearly in my head. It's going to be amazing. One day, you will all get to see these things. They landed on the deck of a ferry tied to a piling. On the other side of the craft, the captain gave a shout as the deck suddenly rocked beneath her feet. The rope, cried Flip, running to the bow. I have it, said Oris. She drew her sword and cut the line holding the raft to the piling. Here now, cried the captain. Who in the blazes? Hold on, cried Flip, ignoring her. His eyes flared with light. A powerful swell of water seized the ferry and propelled it out into the river. Oris and Flip gripped the gunwale. But Oris heard heavy thuds behind them, and her heart sank as she whirled. Barrack and the 3 of the shades had leaped off the dock and onto the ferry's deck just before it had fired away. They swayed heavily, but they did not fall. Flip, cried Oris. She ran for the bow, still holding Sylvan, who struggled and cursed mightily. I see them, said Flip. Put me down, snarled Sylvan. In just a moment, said Oris. There. Flip nodded. His tongue stuck out a bit in concentration. His light swelled in his eyes again. Oris, cried Sylvan. I said I'll drop you in one moment. No, look. Oris turned. The shades were coming closer, stumbling with the shifting ferry deck. Flip, now, he said. Oris did not hesitate. She ran to the bow and threw Sylvan off it. Just full on. Just... The mystic screamed, and then she landed on another boat. Flip had used a massive gust of wind to blow it down the river just in time. Flip and Oris leaped, crossing the narrow gap between the vessels and landing heavily on the other ferry. The wind pushed their ferry farther downriver away from the shades. They made a desperate final rush and a leap, Barrack at their head. The shades missed, and they fell screaming into the water. But Barrack's mighty jump carried him just far enough. His hand seized the gunwale, and he held grimly on as the ferry kept rocketing through the water. Oris ran up to him, her sword held high. As she stood over him, the Shadeborn looked up at her with hate in his eyes. You cannot run from me, he said. Oh, but I very much can, said Oris, and she brought her sword down on his gauntleted hand. Barrack roared and let go, falling away from the ferry and swiftly receding in the water. Flip stepped up beside Oris. Do you know what's dangerous about water? He said. What's that? Said Oris. You don't want to be swimming in it when lightning strikes. Flip raised his hand, and a great bolt of lightning arced into the river, bringing with it a deafening peal of thunder. The lightning jolted through the water. Jolted through the river, just because we've... Nope, never mind. No, we were good. and Oris saw the shade seize up and then sink beneath the surface. But the lightning spun and turned around Barrack, leaving him untouched. Excuse me. He had to struggle mightily to keep his armored frame on the surface, but with his massive arms he managed it. He stared hatefully after them as they sped away down the river. I despise that man, declared Flip. What good is being a wizard if some folk just don't care about my magic? They turned and Flip let his wind die away. Sylvan was standing there with her fists at her waist, glaring at them, especially Oris. I suppose you think that was terribly funny, she said. Don't you? Said Oris. It's hardly my fault that you're too tiny to keep me from throwing you around like a rag doll. Sylvan was silent a moment, though Oris was gratified to see a flush creeping up her neck. At last she turned and strode away to the stern of the boat. There the ferry captain was huddled in the back corner, her tiller abandoned. She was a gangly woman and looked hard-bitten enough, but she had clearly not been prepared for the calamity that had befallen her. Good captain, said Sylvan, you have our deepest apologies for boarding your boat without permission, but now we need you to take us to the northern shore as quickly as possible. I have payment enough to compensate you for the service and for the disturbance. Please be quick about it. It is a matter of the king's justice. Oris's throat went dry at that, but beside her Flip only smirked. That's a nice touch, he muttered. Nothing gets these folks to jump like the threat of angering a redback. Suddenly he sagged and put a hand on Oris's arm, his other hand rising to cover his eyes. Flip, said Oris, are you all right? Fine, he said, only a little weary. I haven't had cause to unleash that much power at once since Wellmont. He rubbed his chest. Let's hope this day goes better than that one did. Oris's mouth became a grim line. Oris and Sil, they're so fucking ridiculous. They're so fucking ridiculous in the best possible way. I love them so goddamn much. The captain turned her tiller to guide the boat north and harangued her rowers to go as fast as they could. Sylvan rejoined them as they watched the northern docks come steadily closer. Once they reached the shore, Sylvan hurried them through the city's northern quarter. More than a few curious looks followed them from the docks, but soon they had faded into the crowd. Not too much longer after that, they were beyond the city walls and into open country. The King's Road ran east from Drakmund, and they walked along it for a few spans before stepping off to the north to discuss their plans. Damn me thrice for not getting us horses, said Sylvan. If I was not terrified of any delay, I would do it now, but that would require calling in favors and collecting coin, and I do not think it will be long before that Shadeborn collects his fellows and renews his pursuit. So we're walking, said Flip. That's little trouble. We walked from Wellmont to Drakmund. We can walk from Drakmund to... Where are we going? Sylvan frowned as she thought about it. We could go to Redbrook. That was where I meant to take you in the first place, but if I was worried about discovery here, I am doubly worried about Redbrook. It is as leaky as the boats that ply their trade there. The seat, said Oris suddenly. We have to go to the High King's seat. Flip and Sylvan both turned on her. The seat? Said Flip incredulously. If we're trying to avoid attention, that's the worst possible choice. It's right in the middle of... It's right in the middle of everything. It's the center of Underrealm itself. And that's just the point, said Oris. The Shades are enemies of the High King. Whatever they've done to gather their strength, they must be terrified of her discovering them. What place would they fear more than the seat? Their greatest places of power, the places they've assembled the most spies and the most fighters, will all be as far from the seat as possible. If we have to wait in one place until Sylvan's master reaches us, I can't think of a safer place to stay. Flip's mouth twisted as he pondered that. He turned to look at Sylvan. She was regarding Oris silently, and in her eyes was the same strange look Oris had seen before, a curious appraisal she could not quite put her finger on. What? Said Oris. Am I wrong? Besides, you said your master knows how to teach me to do whatever it is I'm supposed to do, and then I'm supposed to meet the High King, as hard as that is for me to believe. Why not be close to her when the time comes? Very prudent, said Sylvan, and I can think of no reason to gainsay such a plan. Very well, we shall find our safety on the seat. Oris nodded. Then she noticed that Flip was grinning at her. What? She said, frowning. Why are you smiling like a fool? My dear precious Oris, said Flip, are you actually starting to believe in all this madness? Oris scowled. It doesn't matter if I believe it, our enemies believe it, and as long as they do, they'll keep hunting me. Us. If someone forces you to play a game, you'd better at least follow the same rules they do. So wipe that grin from your lips before I do it for you. Of course, said Flip, his smile not fading at all. Oris turned from him in disgust. From the corner of her eyes, she thought she saw Sylvan grinning at her as well, but Oris was trying doubly hard not to look at her at all. Chapter 11. Wartime King. Eamon of the family Lemstad, Lord Prince of Underrealm and son of the High King, was in his chamber. It was a fine room and large, though it felt smaller thanks to the work table he had constructed for himself. There he had many small blocks of wood and a collection... Yeah. There he had many small blocks of wood and a collection of carving knives, and there were usually some scraps of wood shavings dusting the place, though he cleaned them often. Too, he had some small brushes and a collection of fine paints gathered from all corners of the 9 kingdoms. When his hours were free from duties of state, which was left less often than most, but more often than most would think, he would while away the hours at his little desk, carving soldiers or knights, or sometimes other figures, first whittling their shapes from the wood before painting them in bright and vibrant colors. It was the only time and place in the palace, and indeed in all the world, where he was able to be entirely alone, at least until a knock came at his door, as it did now. Eamon lifted his head and frowned, but his voice when he spoke was pleasant. "Come in." The door opened. One of his guards poked her head in. Her name was Hodari, Eamon recalled, and she had only recently been assigned to him. She had a dazzling smile, and he wished she would show it more often. "Your Excellency," said Hodari, "Idolin of the family Steth is here to see you." "Why, send him in at once," said Eamon. He put down his carving knife and hurried to sweep away the wood shavings that littered the table. He had not quite finished when Idolin entered, and Eamon went to embrace him. "Good day, friend," said Eamon. "I hope business has not brought you here, and we can have a drink, though I suspect that is not the case." "Your Excellency," said Idolin, grinning. "You are astute as always. I bring a summons from the High King. She requests your presence." "A summons?" said Eamon. "Surely she could have sent one of her own messengers." Idolin bowed his head. "She happened to see me standing near, and it is hardly a dishonor to bring word to the Lord Prince himself." Eamon smiled and clapped him on the shoulder. "Humility is a hard cloak to pull off, but you wear it well. Stay near, will you? I should like that drink regardless, and who knows but that I may need your help with whatever my mother wishes to speak with me about." "Of course, Your Excellency," said Idolin, bowing his head again. "Then excuse me." Eamon gave Idolin's shoulder a last squeeze before striding out of the room and towards his mother's throne room. He swept through the halls, his half-cape swirling behind him, exchanging pleasant smiles and greetings with the guards and servants who scurried about, seeing to the business of the palace. Not for the first time, he bemoaned the way most of them reacted to him, too deferent, too overawed. Only those who had known him most of his life treated him as a real person. But he shed such thoughts as he approached the throne room, and the guards there swung the door open before him. "Her Majesty is in her private quarters, Your Excellency," said Olaf, even as they bowed. Eamon thanked them and strode through the empty throne room. 2 attendants were cleaning it, though Eamon had never seen a speck of dirt within. They fell to one knee and bowed their heads. Eamon gave them a nod and a smile, but they did not see it, and again he wilted a little inside. His mood darkened further the moment he saw his mother. Enelin sat at a small side table, where she often dictated her letters and read reports from kings and other nobles across the kingdoms. But there were no papers there now, and the quill lay dry. She had leaned back in her chair, her legs apart, one elbow on the arm of her chair, and her chin burrowing into... What's wrong with this? She had leaned back in her chair, legs apart, one elbow on the chair's arm and her chin burrowing into her fist. She looked crushed, as though a great and invisible weight drove her towards the floor. Her eyes were distant, and she did not seem to notice as Eamon came to a stop in her doorway. Eamon shook off a sense of foreboding. "Your Majesty?" he said tentatively. "Excuse me." Enelin blinked and looked up. "Eamon," she said. She got to her feet. Almost she began to speak, but then she darted a look around at the 3 guards stationed in her room. "Give us a moment alone." The guards filed out quickly and silently. Eamon kept his eyes on his mother. She looked as worried as he had ever seen her, and she seemed to be avoiding his gaze. He could think of no business that would have produced such an effect on her. No rumblings among the politicking that always plagued the palace. After the last guard left, Enelin went to another side table and poured a glass of wine. She looked back at him and held the decanter over a second glass. Yes, please, said Eamon, but your majesty, what is wrong? Mother now, if you would, said Enelin as she poured his wine. She went and sat at her desk again. Eamon pulled a chair over from the corner and sat near her. Taking his glass and then placing one of his hands over hers. Mother, he said, please speak to me. You almost have me frightened. Enelin's mouth worked. I have just received a messenger, a small party of messengers, in fact. They once traveled with Jordel of the family Adair. Enelin finally looked up and met his gaze. Jordel has died. For a long moment Eamon was still. Only his hand moved, sliding over to grip the arm of his chair as if for support. How? He said, surprised at the quietness of his own voice. He died in the Great Rock Mountains, west of northern Selvin. But how? Repeated Eamon. What was he doing there? Was it an accident? No, said Enelin. He died in battle. She took a deep pull of her wine and then set it on the desk before leaning forwards, elbows on her knees as she rubbed her hands slowly before her eyes. I've told you several things over the years, Eamon. Some of them were things I should not have told you, strictly speaking. Do you remember what I have said of the Ceromancer and the Necromancer? Eamon scoffed. How could one forget such a thing? But then his grim smile vanished, and he froze, staring at her. Yes, said Enelin quietly. They have been reborn. Jordel found the Necromancer's forces in the Great Rocks. He died to save others who traveled with him so that they might deliver message of this coming doom to me, so that we might prepare for war. Quick restroom. Grab back. Eamon realized his mouth was open and he closed it. His words seemed to come with great effort, as though each one was a boulder he had strained to push up and out of his chest. "But, Your Majesty, Mother, you said they would not be reborn in your lifetime." "I never said that," said Enlil. "I said I hoped they would not be reborn in my lifetime. But that hope has failed. There is no question of it. The necromancer has brought back his dark arts, and his favored servants now walk Underrealm again. They are those who death will not touch, the Shadeborn. Worse, it seems he has amassed great strength to himself, a greater strength of soldiers and arms than should have been possible, with no one detecting it until now. The messengers spoke of a stronghold of enemies in the mountains, but the necromancer himself was not there. That tells us he must have other points of strength throughout Underrealm, and the one we have discovered is likely not even the greatest of them." Okay. Just had to check something. Make sure I wasn't totally going against what I put in an earlier book. All right. Ammon stood, pacing back and forth. Though his mother's chamber was even grander than his own, it now felt impossibly small and closing in by the moment. Do we know where he is, and what of the Lifemage? They must be out there. Always they are born together. He stopped and turned to her. In fact, do we know it is a man? That we know from what his soldiers said in the Great Rock, said Annalyn. But as for your other questions, no. We have no idea where he might be, nor the Lifemage. In fact, I have now told you the extent of what we do know. Very well, said Eamon. These are dark tidings, but now it is time for action. What can we do to prepare? I must think on that and take counsel, including with the mystics, said Annalyn. I will require your presence at my table, of course. I hope you did not have other plans for the next few days. Yep. New boot goofing. New book goofing in this case. How much time do you think we can waste sitting idly and planning, said Eamon. We have to make a decision. We must send all our forces to this stronghold and... But he stopped short as he looked back at his mother. She was not quite slumped, but she was bowed in her chair, still looking as though she was crushed by a weight he could not see. Eamon's expression softened. He went and knelt before her chair, taking one of her hands in both of his own. Mother, he said quietly, it will be all right. She was not looking at him. All my life I have worked to maintain order and peace in the Nine Kingdoms, even before I took this throne. Now her gaze slid to him. This threatens all of it. This destroys all of it. There is no chance of peace, no tamping down this spark before it becomes a flame. There's every chance this war will outlast me, or even claim my life. I never wanted to be a wartime king. It will be my legacy, for good or for ill. That will not happen, said Eamon, not while I am alive to prevent it. We shall weather this storm and bring it swiftly to its close. Whatever skills I have that might aid in that, I pledge them to you, and all my tireless effort. Nothing else shall consume my thoughts or plans. She gave a quiet, sad smile. Thank you, my son. Her hands rose to cup his face. It is for the lesser kings to decide whether you take the throne when I am gone. I shall have no say in it, but you deserve the throne. Your desire for action is no fault. It comes from your desire to make things better for our subjects, and I cherish you for that reason among many others. Eamon gave her a worried smile. There is no higher praise nor anyone I would rather hear it from. Together we can withstand this storm. I swear it. I will endeavor to believe you. Chapter 11, done. We're making pretty good time. Chapter 12, Flight's End. The orphanage was silent as Oris stole down the hall. Though the stairs were often creaky, now they lay silent beneath her feet. She had memorized every firm spot and now stepped only upon them. The upper hall was just as quiet as the lower, but here there were lanterns on side tables. The hall was not wide enough to make hiding in the shadows worth anything, and so she merely ran down the hall as quickly as she could. Her feet, too large for her young body, yet gave only slight whispers against the stone. Just ahead, the door to the faculty room stood ajar. Oris gave a quick glance behind her and then to the left. No one else seemed to be up. No one else seemed to be up. One or another of the attendants would be walking the halls, but they must all be downstairs. That would not last long. She took a deep breath. She had never used this door. Its hinge might be rusted and squeaky, and she whispered a brief prayer to the sky that it would not be. Her hand fell upon the latch, and she pushed. The door swung open silently. Oris released her breath, which seemed to hiss impossibly loud in the stillness. There, on the other side of the room, was the cabinet. It was where the matron stored anything she had confiscated from the children. Oris's hand rose by instinct to clutch her amulet, but it was not there. She scowled and stole forwards. The cabinet was unlocked. Oris was surprised at how few items lay inside. She scanned the shelves quickly. There it was, crystal shaped like an arrowhead and a leather thong tied around the grooves. Oris scooped it up and ran her fingers over its edges. They were untouched. No harm had come to it. She loosed a long, quiet sigh. Oresiat. She whirled. There in the door of the office stood Matron Fleda. The old woman was wizened and short, but not yet bent with age. Her dress was plain in cut and a lovely dark green in color, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing, and they were trained on Oris now. You could not have thought I would miss its absence. Did you think this would lessen your penalty? I do not care what penalty you lay upon me, said Oris. It is mine. I will have it back. Matron fled aside and folded her arms across her chest. Arasiat, you must be aware that it is exactly this attitude that lost you the amulet in the first place. There are rules, said Oris. Your own rules. I am allowed to keep one thing. This is mine. Then what will make you listen, said Fleda. You never attend. You will not obey. Your own rules, said Oris, in a voice very like a snarl. I will not be parted from it. I will leave if you take it again. I will run away. It is mine. This you shall not take from me. For a long moment, Matron Fleda did not respond. They only stared at each other in the dim light of the lantern silhouetting her from behind. Then at last the old woman sighed and unfolded her arms. Go to bed at once, she said sharply. I am changing your chores to chamber pots for the rest of the month of Septus, and Octus as well. Oris could scarcely believe it. For a moment she only kept staring with wide eyes. Then she bowed her head. Yes, matron. We are not your enemies. Oris looked back up at her in confusion. What? I and the other faculty. You always view us as foes to defeat, and nothing convinces you otherwise. You are determined to be right regardless of what is right. One day I hope you will learn that the world does not always bow to your will. Again Oris ducked her head. I know that, she thought. If the sky granted wishes, I would never have come here. But she did not say the words out loud. She had what she had come for. As Matron Fleda stepped aside, Oris stole down the hallway and crept back into bed. Oris awoke. Her hand went to the amulet, still there. She sighed with relief and sat up. Flip had taken the second watch from her, and now he slept, but Sylvan was awake, and Oris was only half surprised to see the mystic staring at her. As Oris blinked the last sleep from her eyes, Sylvan gave her a nod of greeting. Above them the sky was gray with the coming dawn. A morning chill was in the air, and Oris pulled her blanket up around her shoulders. You were moving in your sleep, said Sylvan. Did you dream? No, lied Oris. Do you know the lands between here and the seat? Sylvan cocked her head. Well enough. How fast can we reach it? 5 days with luck, said Sylvan, looking away to the north. What under the sky makes you think we'll have any luck? Sylvan smiled. We have evaded the enemy twice now. We will keep doing it as long as we have to. And once Jordell joins us, everything will be all right. Everything? Snorted Oris. Pardon my doubt. It is understandable, said Sylvan. She glanced to Flip and then back again. I had a question now that we have a moment alone. What is that amulet you wear? Oris sighed and lifted it out from under her shirt, twiddling it in her fingers. I know little more than you do. I've had it my whole life. When I was a child, it was the only thing I owned all of my own. In the orphanage, there were rules. Every child was allowed to have one inviolate possession. The amulet was mine. But you do not remember where it came from, said Sylvan. Oris grimaced. I have something. There was a man. I was a child, a very young one. I can see him giving me the amulet, and I remember the sound of his voice telling me to keep it always, so I have. Was he your father? Said Sylvan. Oris shook her head at once. No, I know that much. There's a feeling to the memory. And besides, the man was far too old. Likely he was only a kindly old man who saw a bedraggled orphan and wished to give her a present. I doubt he knew there was anything special about it. Sylvan's mouth twisted. I have a little trust in coincidence, and especially when it comes to your life. Someone just so happened to give the Lifemage a gift that warns her of the necromancer's servants. The chance that was an accident is so slim as to be impossible. Oris shrugged. Then you know more of it than I do, it seems. Soon they woke Flip and set off north again. Their aim was to travel almost to the Great Bay. Just before they reached it, they would turn west and make for Garsek, Sylvan's capital, from where they could take passage on a ship and bring them to the seat itself. All the first day they looked often behind them, fearful of seeing figures pursuing them across the wilderness, but there was no sign, and by the second day they grew more hopeful that they had outpaced their pursuers at last. The sky above them was gray and cloudy, a melancholy blanket thrown over the sky and dampening their mood. This is a good sign, said Sylvan. My heart misses the sun, but we will be harder to spot. It is a boon so long as the sky does not turn to rain. The lands just north of Drachmund were flat and featureless for many leagues, but then they began to break up. Hills and small ridges thrust up all around them, like rumpled skirts of the Wadish mountains far to the east. Oris and Sylvan did their best to navigate around the rougher terrain, and whenever they came to a high place that let them survey the lands around, they would pause and rest for a while as they determined how best to avoid any sudden obstacles. On the third day, the clouds parted and the sun came out, but the three of them hardly noticed because they passed into a wide forest, the same great wood, in fact, that stretched far to the west and into Dorsey, where they had walked along the Dragon's Tail and Ombi had met his doom. But this was its eastern edge, and it was not so thick. We shall not be so lucky on the morrow, said Sylvan. On the third, but the three of them hardly noticed because they passed into a wide forest, the same great wood, in fact, that stretched far to the west and into Dorsey, where they had walked along the Dragon's Tail, and Olby had met his doom. But this was its eastern edge, and it was not so thick. We shall not be so lucky on the morrow, said Sylvan. After this wood, there is little but open land between us and the great bay. If our pursuers should draw within a league of us, they will have little difficulty spotting us as we flee across the landscape. Now I do hope for rain. It will slow us, but it will hide us as well. The world might not have been built to grant wishes, but the sky seemed to grant Sylvan's now. Just as she told them, on the fourth day they passed into wide open plains. But the sky above them grew gray again, and then darker, and then the sky unleashed lightning and rain upon the land. They drew their oiled cloaks tighter about themselves and pressed on through it. "We're almost to the coast," said Sylvan, shouting to be heard over the storm. "We shall have to find a place to shelter from the rain overnight, but this will be our last time bedding down in the wild. Tomorrow we shall reach Garsek and then the seat." "Thank the sky," said Flip. "Drakman made me lazy, and I liked it. I hope your master's coin is still able to secure some nice soft beds." Sylvan smiled despite herself. "It shall be my pleasure." They reached the coastal road soon after. It ran west a ways before diving into hilly country again, close to the towns of Kendall and Mallow. The broken land pressed close on all sides of the road, and they could never see farther than the next bend or two. Oris got the feeling that the hills were looking down on them, looming like soldiers with weapons at their belts. "Sylvan," said Oris, what if the shades reached this place before us? It would be easy for them to watch the road and prepare for our coming." "They could hardly have traveled faster than we did," said Sylvan. "Even with that brute Barrack whipping them on?" said Flip. Sylvan frowned and did not answer. The day was wearing on, and Oris began to think they should find a place to shelter for the night. They came upon a stone bridge that spanned a narrow cut, through which ran a river 2 paces below them, running north towards the great bay. "We might camp under the bridge," said Oris. "It will stave off the rain, and we are not likely to find better shelter before it gets dark." "Darker, you mean," said Flip, glaring at the stormy sky. "I would rather press on," said Sylvan, though Oris could see the doubt in her eyes. "The farther we go today, the earlier we reach the seat tomorrow." "The farther we go today, the earlier we reach the seat tomorrow." "Do you mean to keep running through the night, then?" said Oris. "Please tell her you don't," moaned Flip. "I may want a proper bed, but just now I could die happy in my bedroll." Sylvan paused for a moment in doubt, but then her eyes shot wide with fear. "Oris," she said, pointing. Oris looked down. Her amulet was glowing again. "Dark," she spat, pulling it out before it grew hot to the touch. Flip whirled, flames springing to life in his palms. Raindrops hissed and steamed as they struck it. "Bloody inconvenient. Where are they, behind or ahead?" "It's not a compass," growled Oris. "To be fair, you don't quite know what it is," said Flip. "We cannot stand and fight," said Sylvan. "We have to run." All right. Real quick, I'm gonna go. My phone alarm is going off in the other room, and it's kind of bugging me. Whether we go to a day. To be fair, you don't quite know what it is, said Flip. We cannot stand and fight, said Sylvan. We have to run. Either way we run could lead us straight to them, said Oris. Do you wish to toss that coin, or do you have another plan? I do, said Sylvan. This. She seized Oris and Flip's arms in a grip like iron manacles. With a heave and a leap, she threw all three of them off the bridge. Sky above, she's strong. The thought whipped through Oris's mind and was gone. Oris did not even have time to yelp in surprise before plunging into the water. Thankfully, it was much warmer here than the Dragon's Tail in the south, and Oris fought her way back to the surface at once. Dark take you, woman, sputtered Flip as he scrambled for the bank. You did not think for a moment that we could have climbed down? This was faster, said Sylvan, stroking calmly through the water, and we would have gone in the water regardless. Maybe next time you could ask before heaving us off a bridge, said Oris. Maybe next time you could ask before hoisting me over your shoulder, said Sylvan. As though you didn't enjoy that, muttered Flip. Why must I be the one to suffer the consequences of you two posturing at each other? Sylvan ignored him. Stop here a moment. They reached the bank just around the next turn in the river. Looking back, Oris saw they were about a span away from the road. Dark figures appeared upon the bridge, little more than shadowy shapes in the rain. Several figures came from the west, but then a few came from the east. One among the eastern group stood head and shoulders taller than the rest. Oris shuddered as she recognized Barrick's silhouette. I'm glad we did not flip the coin, she said. It looks like both sides were stamped with moons instead of heads. Indeed, said Sylvan. Come, we should swim on a little ways farther before coming out of the water to walk again. They may guess we have gone this way. They followed the river for 2 long hours until it finally spilled into the Great Bay. The rain kept up the whole way, though it did soften before they reached the river mouth. There they found a small fishing village. Sylvan stopped them a span away from the cluster of homes, with candlelight glistening merrily from their windows. Stay here, she said. I'm going to get us a boat to sail west a while before we sleep. Why not stay in the village, said Flip. We must be able to find a barn or some other place we can hide from this damnable rain. That would endanger these people, said Sylvan. Barrick and the Shades will be searching this area. If they find our trail and it leads them here, fine, growled Flip. But if I catch my death of cold out here, I hope you'll feel very guilty. I shall be despondent, said Sylvan, arching an eyebrow. Now wait here and stay hidden. In half an hour she returned and led them to the shore, where they found a little boat waiting for them. Oris suspected Sylvan had flashed her mystic badge to secure it. They climbed in the boat, and Oris took the oars, rowing west as hard as she could. After an hour, Sylvan bade her to land. It's just ridiculous. They're the best. There's not much time till daylight, said Sylvan. We should use them to get what rest we can. I shall watch tonight. We should trade, said Oris. You'll be little good to us tomorrow if you're half dead from weariness. Sylvan smirked. This will not be my first sleepless night. Turn the boat over. You and Flip can shelter underneath it. At last you speak sense, said Flip, and I'll offer no arguments. Soon it was done. They turned the boat over, holding up one side of it with sticks dug into the sand. Flip climbed in first, and Oris followed him. Their bedrolls were soaked through from the river, but they laid them out anyway to keep the sand from getting into their every nook and cranny. Oris thought that nerves might keep her awake, but she was so weary that she soon drifted off. The last thing she saw before sleep took her was Sylvan sitting alone on the shore, and behind her the Great Bay, where Oris imagined she might have been able to see the seat if not for the rain that hid it from view. Quick restroom, real quick. Almost there. Yeah, I've been thinking about what to do on the addenda. I don't think that I'm going to do addenda for the Resurrection Cycle books. Like, it's just one book, you know what I mean? I think that if there's addenda that belongs in Lifemage Dawning, then I'll just stick it in the back of Quest. Because Quest will definitely get addenda. The day dawned bright and peaceful and curiously quiet. The rain had died in the night, but Oris groaned as she sat up, feeling a deep soreness in her arms from rowing the night before. At least she was not freezing cold. The air was decently warm, and the heat of her and Flip's bodies had made the space under the boat quite tolerable. Out on the shore, Sylvan's eyes looked somewhat hollow, but there was no trace of weariness in her body as she rose and helped Oris climb out from under the boat. Yeah. Good morning, she said. Take heart despite your aching limbs, for this is our last day on the road. By sundown today, we shall be safe on the sea. Safe, snorted Oris. Marginally safer, you mean, as I'm sure Flip will remind us when he rises. Sylvan smiled. Oris turned to look northwest where the seat lay, wondering if she really could see it as she had imagined the night before. But the great bay was shrouded almost entirely by fog. A misty morning, she said. It is not unheard of on the bay, though it is a tad unseasonable, said Sylvan. But no matter, we should see the seat clearly enough when we step upon its docks. Let us get moving. High King Enelin sat upon her throne, listening to a report being read off to her by an attendant. Her mind was elsewhere, but she was reasonably certain she was being informed about tax complaints in Idris. She stared at the courtier, a tall, thin man with intense eyes and a bulging way of speaking, and let her thoughts drift away west to a stronghold in the Great Rocks in the city of Wellmont. A wartime king, she thought. Aemon's constant assurances were ash in her mouth. This would be her legacy, had already become her legacy. In the week since learning of the Shade, she had mustered every soldier she could and sent them marching west in 2 forces. A smaller force would investigate the Shade stronghold where Jordell had died. The larger force would proceed to Wellmont, still under siege from the city of Dorsey. Her advisors suspected the Shades played some part in fomenting the battle there. The lack could be felt across the seat. Even in her own throne room there were only half as many guards as normal. A skeleton garrison guarded the city, their numbers stretched thin. It occurred to her that she had entirely lost the thread of what the courtier was saying. She raised a hand. He stopped speaking at once and bowed his head. "I've lost you somewhere," declared Enelin. "I suspect it is because you are throwing so many figures at me. Figures I might better understand if they were written down, rather than read off to me in a manner that keeps me from relating them to each other. Is there anything in your report you would wish to obfuscate?" The man's cheeks flamed as he raised his head to look at her. "Of course not, your majesty," he said. "Then submit to me a document of what you are trying to tell me, as well as your proposed solution," said Enelin. "If I require your further counsel afterwards, then I shall summon you." The man's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Of course, your majesty," he said. "Shall it suffice for me to submit a copy of the last report I sent you, or would..." "Shall it suffice for me to submit a copy of the last report I sent you, and to which I am still waiting to hear a reply, or would you prefer I update the figures and send a new one?" Enelin could not quite suppress a small smile. "You can hide a barb, I will give you that. I did not know such a report had already been submitted. I shall have my assistants located, and..." From outside the palace, horns began to blare. Enelin shot to her feet. Everyone else in the room fell to one knee, but she ignored them as the horns droned on and on. A wartime king. Oris, Flip, and Sylvan had taken the fishing boat to avoid leaving tracks, but it was not as fast as walking. Since they had already left signs of their encampment and did not wish to take the time to hide them, Sylvan decided they would travel on foot the rest of the way to the sea. They followed the shore for a time, but eventually it began to wind enough that they decided to risk returning to the road. Oris's hackles rose as they navigated through the hills again, but there was no sign of the enemy. "They might still be searching to the east," said Oris. "Or the rain could have washed away their tracks," said Sylvan. "We must still be as cautious as ever." But despite her words, they began to push west faster and faster. Soon they were half jogging, and not even Flip spoke a word of complaint at the pace. Each of them could feel eyes at their backs. There was a frightening sense that they were too exposed, as though an arrow might come flying at any moment. Could Barrack be lying in wait behind that hill, or in that ditch? Yet Garsek was only a few hours away. If they could just reach it, if they could just reach the seat, everything would be all right. That was what Oris kept telling herself. The morning wore on. The thick mist on the air slowly dissipated. The air remained cool, yet they were working up a heavy sweat, which the sun whisked pleasantly away from their skin. "Almost there," said Sylvan, panting. "Do you see that next ridge? From atop it we can see the seat." "Never my favorite place," gasped Flip, "but just now it shall seem a paradise." They began to climb. The land sloped steeply upwards, and the road cut back and forth across it. Oris's legs were burning now, but she pushed on. Nothing mattered except seeing the seat, seeing safety. And then an instant before she crested the ridge, in the back of her mind there came a thought. That smell on the air. Is that smoke? She reached the top of the ridge and stopped. Sylvan froze beside her. Flip had lagged a few paces behind, but a moment later he came stumbling and wheezing to stand beside them. He too froze in his tracks, and his heaving breaths slowly quieted. The seat lay burning before them. How long is chapter 13? Oh. Do I go for it? I think I go for it, right? Yeah, we're going for it. Especially because, if I'm not mistaken, 108,000. Oh, wow, really? Wow, okay, well, there you go. Chapter 13, Loss and Findings. In more than one sense, the High King's Seat was the crown jewel of Underrealm. The city had long ago been built on the largest island in the Great Bay, a stretch of land so wide that it took most of a day to cross it the long way. At first it had only been a small settlement, a foothold and a spearhead for the armies of Roth, the first High King, as he had directed his war of conquest from the island of Southbreak, far to the northeast at the entrance of the Great Bay. It had remained a city of the kingdom of Selvin for centuries, and was soon overshadowed by Garsek, the capital, which was built on the coast nearby to the west. Then, nearly 600 years ago, the High King Andara had commanded that Underrealm's capital be moved from Southbreak, where Roth had reigned, to the island, and it was she who renamed it the High King's Seat. She declared that though the seat was of Underrealm, it should be the property of none of the 9 kingdoms, but her own personal holding, beholden to no rule but hers. Slowly the city had grown. Where before it had covered only a quarter of the island and the rest given to farmland that fed it, now that was no longer necessary. Food was brought by ship from the coastal lands all around, who could make the journey in only a few hours. Thus the city grew, and its walls were expanded so that they circled the island's very rim. Docks covered the island's western and eastern shores. Some of the wealthiest merchants and nobility upon the island maintained gardens, and high kings through the centuries had built various parks for the seat's citizens. But aside from that, from one end of the island to the other, there was only city. Now a great portion of that city was aflame. A monstrous column of black smoke roiled into the air, so thick and so intense that it burned Oris's nose even from so far away. Sylvan's expression was one of stony rage. She seemed to be trying to maintain an outward calm, but fury burned in her eyes, and her fingers twitched as though they longed to draw her swords. She took 2 long, slow breaths. Even Flip was dour. Oris knew he had no particular love of royalty or nobility, but the seat was different. The High King was by all accounts a fair and just woman, and the 9 kingdoms prospered under her rule. To see this attack against the heart of Underrealm itself, Oris found herself wishing to take up her blade in the seat's defense, though of course she could not possibly reach the city before the fighting would be over. "Is this him?" said Oris. "Is this the necromancer?" Sylvan pointed. "Those are Dulmish ships. They attacked from the east." "It's rebellion, then," said Flip, "against the High King herself. Yet there are other ships on the western docks." "And they bear no flags," said Oris. "Dull Moon does not act alone." "That does not mean they are shades," said Sylvan.
Oris gave her a dubious look. You yourself said you don't trust in coincidence, and we know the necromancer has gathered more strength than you thought possible. This can't be unrelated. Sylvan's expression grew pained. No, I suppose it cannot, and if that is the case, then yes. This is likely the first great stroke in the war. Let us pray to the sky he has not slain the High King, as is surely his aim. Suddenly she turned to them, and the fury in her eyes burned brighter. We have to get there. We have to help. Help what? Said Flip. The city's already burning. We can't get there in time. We can be there for the aftermath. Sylvan pointed to the bay itself. West of the seat, a small fleet of boats were making their way across the water towards Sylvan's capital of Garsek, which shone like a jewel on the shore, free of flame or smoke. But these were no warships. They were fishing boats, small pleasure craft, and merchant ships. The folk of the seat are fleeing the attackers. The High King may be among them. They will need defense if Dolmoon decides to press their attack. Come. She turned and ran back down the ridge towards the road. Oris followed her without a word, and Flip came a moment later, grumbling under his breath. Garsek was still some leagues away, and it was hours before they reached the city's south wall. Oris expected to be challenged at the gate, but it stood closed, and no guards looked down on them from atop it. Sylvan glared up at the gatehouse. That is not a good sign, she said. Every guard in the city has likely been drawn to the eastern docks to help the coming refugees, said Flip. Or may they are mounting a counterattack. King Anwar has always been a loyal servant of the High King. Regardless, we have to get in, said Oris. Flip, could you get over and open the gate? Flip's mouth soured. If someone sees me coming in, they may think I am some wizard of the enemy. I have no desire to be shot down in mid-flight. Send me instead, said Sylvan. I will get the gate open for the two of you to follow. Fair enough, said Flip. Oris, get her as high as you can, and I will carry her the rest of the way. Oris raised an eyebrow at Sylvan. Is that all right? After Drakmund, I won't hoist you up again if you don't wish it. Sylvan gave her a grim smile. It was my idea. Give me a boost. I thank you for asking, this time at least. Oris interlaced her fingers, and Sylvan placed a boot within them. But when Oris heaved her up, Sylvan's sword belt swung around, and one scabbard slammed into Oris's forehead. She grunted and reeled back with stars exploding in her eyes. Hold still, growled Sylvan, who teetered dangerously with her hands on the city wall. I'm trying, said Oris. 1, 2, 3, 4. She flung Sylvan up as hard as she could. The smaller woman flailed in the air as she rose up a pace, and then she kept rising, but slower. Flip's eyes glowed as he guided currents of air around her, sending her careful braids up and spinning around her face. His jaw clenched, his lips a thin line as he tried to hold her steady, but Sylvan spun slightly despite his efforts. I'm used to carrying myself, not others, Flip told Oris irritably. Her swords are heavier than I thought. Sylvan made a desperate grab and seized the top of the wall. With her hands securing her hold, Flip gave a final burst of wind. Sylvan flipped out of sight beyond the wall, landing with a crash on the ramparts. Sylvan, cried Oris, are you all right? Fine, came Sylvan's voice. Be ready. Soon Oris heard the clanking of chains and turning gears, and the gate swung open before them. They ran inside and rejoined Sylvan, who immediately led them north and east through the city streets. Like the walls, the city streets were abandoned. Like the walls, the streets were abandoned. Most people had gone to the docks to help those fleeing the seat's destruction. Anyone who had remained here seemed wise enough to wait inside their homes rather than loiter about outside. No one impeded their progress through the city. No one impeded their progress through the city, though Oris saw some folk watching them, hastily hiding behind curtains and shutters as they passed by. The murmur of voices sounded ahead of them as they neared the docks at last. Finally, other people started to appear in the streets. And slowly the crowds grew. Almost there, said Sylvan, who was leading them as they jogged on. Be ready in case it comes to a fight. Dolmoon or the Shades may try to take the docks to prevent the refugees from reaching safety. Excuse me. Oris nodded and placed a hand on her sword hilt as she ran, while Flip flexed his hands. Oris almost wished it would come to a fight, just so she could have something to hit after watching the seat burn. But a few streets away from the city's docks, they pulled up short as a line of red-cloaked figures blocked the way ahead of them. Oris's heart skipped a beat. Mystics, she thought. Halt, cried one of them. Oris recognized the emblem on her shoulder that proclaimed her a captain. No one is permitted to approach the docks. We are here to help, said Sylvan. Folk are fleeing the seat. And we are here to receive them, said the captain. If you want to help, go to the constabulary. They can tell you how to be of service to the refugees. What of the High King, said Sylvan. Is she alive? The captain glowered at her. I have no answers for you. If you want to help, go to the constabulary. We've come to aid you, you ass, snapped Flip. You've got 3 pairs of strong and willing arms, and you won't use them? The captain's dark brown cheeks grew darker in a flush, and a scar showed on her chin as she clenched it. "You are unknown to me, and I am not letting you get near the docks. As if you could stop us," said Flip. The mystics tensed, but Oris snatched Flip's arm and drew him back. "Flip," she said in a low voice, "the seat was just attacked by former allies. They don't know who they can trust. If the High King did survive and she's landed here, the most foolish thing they could do would be to let strangers near her." Flip glared at her for a moment, but at last he nodded and placed his hand over hers where it held his arm, letting Oris lead him away from the docks. Behind them, Oris heard Sylvan say quietly to the mystic captain, "Forgive our friend. Seeing the seat burn has raised his blood." "It has raised everyone's," replied the mystic. "See, it does not lead him to do something foolish." Sylvan jogged to catch up with Oris and Flip. Oris turned to her as they kept walking. "What shall we do then?" she said. "To the constabulary?" But Sylvan was looking at the streets around them, and her expression had grown anxious. "I do not think so. You raised a good point. No one knows where the attack came from, us least of all. I would not parade you about the streets of the city any more than we already have. Come, I know a place we can stay." Flip smiled, though it seemed forced. "I hope it is near to a house of lovers again." Sylvan rolled her eyes and could not help a little smirk. "I am sure you shall find some kind of satisfaction. Now follow me." Some leagues to the south, Beric led his shades as they trudged along the coast of the great bay. To the north of them, the black column of smoke continued to rise from the seat into the sky. It filled Beric's heart with a fierce joy, though it was unexpected. The plan had been to capture the seat, not burn it to the ground, but his father had often reminded them even a plan that is perfect in the mind must yet bend to the waking world. Beric had grown increasingly frustrated through the night, never letting his party sleep or even stop to take a rest. Their steps flagged as they stumped along behind him. Beric ignored them. He could keep walking for days, even weeks, and he would if it would put the Lifemage within his grasp once again. His fists tightened at the thought. "Step faster," he barked. The shades around him jumped, their postures straightening slightly. "We must find her." The others hurried their pace. Beric knew most of them did not think they would find the Lifemage, but he did not care. He would find her. He had to. Beric. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes shooting wide. The voice in his mind made him think at once of his father, but when he turned, the man standing there was not the Lord. Beric turned to the rest of the shades. "Halt, wait here, eat what food you have and rest, but not too well. We will search on in a moment." He turned and stalked away without waiting for a reply, while the shades behind him settled upon the ground with heavy sighs of relief. Beric strode off until they were out of sight, and then he rounded on the vision, folding his arms. "Where is father?" The attendant's jaw clenched at that. "Where do you think he is, Beric? He is busy with the seat, and it is because his attention has been drawn there that he knows the Lifemage reached Garsek. She has evaded you." Beric loosed a roar of wordless fury. A small sapling stood nearby. He drew his massive sword and cut it in half. "Dark Taker," said Beric. "I will go to Garsek then, and I will hunt her down. I will burn the city to the ground if it means her corpse lies in the ashes." "You will do no such thing," said the attendant. To Beric's mounting fury, he sounded darkly amused. "Father requires something else of you." "Then father can come and tell me that himself," snarled Beric. Suddenly the vision of the attendant seemed to swell. He rose into a dark and terrible figure, eyes filled with shadow and fury. For all his mighty size, Beric felt diminutive before him. "Our father is the Lord and the Savior of these 9 wretched kingdoms." Like thunder, the attendant's voice shattered the air, and Beric flinched. "His wisdom is greater than kings and wizards, and his desire is pure. He has more important duties than serving as a messenger boy merely to save the pride of selfish children." Beric's pulse thundered in his ears. Had the attendant stood before him in truth, the words might have brought him to violence, but he could do nothing to the man now. And deep in his heart he realized that the attendant was right. There were too many pieces, too many moving parts for father to deliver every message personally. But he might have spoken at least to one of his favorite sons, thought Beric. He straightened his posture and lifted his chin. "Very well," he said. "What does father require of me?" The attendant's fury diminished, and the size of the vision shrank with it. In a moment he was but a simple man again, and when he spoke it was as though the rage of a moment ago had never been. "Rogan leads the retreat of his forces into the birchwood. You will join him there, to participate in the scouring of the woods alongside him. Then you will help him disperse the shades throughout Selvin and Dorsey. Further instruction will come as soon as father has them." "Very well," said. Beric. "Is there anything else?" The attendant sighed. "There is. Father wished for me to tell you that he loves you, and he asks that you not blame yourself for the Lifemage reaching Garsek. The threads of fate are many, and none can see the whole skein." He loves you for your service and your devotion. Beric felt a stinging behind his eyes and turned away. I do not require your platitudes. They are his words, not the ones I would have spoken. When Beric turned back again, the attendant was gone. He headed back to where the shades were waiting for him. It did not matter what the attendant said or even what Father said. Beric would be the one to bring the Lifemage to her end. Sylvan took them to the Dancing Fish. It was one of the steedier inns she frequented, a dilapidated ramshackle building squatting in an alley removed from any main streets. Though she had not been here in well over a year, the innkeep Camel recognized her and took her silver without a word. They took food and drink, and then they retired to their room, where all three of them slept like the dead. Sylvan did not even order them to set a watch, for the inn's locks were very strong. She rose earlier than the others, a little while before dawn, and went to break her fast in the common room. Camel greeted her at the bar with a weary expression. There were bags under the innkeep's eyes, and Sylvan doubted she had slept. "What news in the night?" said Sylvan. "The High King survived the attack," said Camel. She yawned. "Thank the sky." "Thank the sky," said Sylvan fervently. "Where is she?" Camel looked amused. "You think your red cloaks would tell me?" Sylvan smiled, but then she glanced over her shoulder. "No mention of that when my friends are around, if it please you." Camel nodded. "Of course, let me get you fed." But hardly had Sylvan sat down with her meal before Oris appeared in the common room as well. It was a cramped space. The table Sylvan had chosen only had chairs against the wall and not enough room to place them on the other side. Sylvan was about to rise and find another table where they could sit across from each other, but Oris came over without comment and slumped down on the bench right next to her. Their arms brushed as she settled, and the hairs on Sylvan's arms rose. Oris reached over to take a slice of bacon from her plate. "Stop it," Sylvan told herself, as though she would ever feel the same, as though she would even be in the same room with you if she truly knew you. "What's our plan?" said Oris in a low voice. The room was empty except for Camel, who was busy clinking dishes behind the bar and too far away to hear. "I must seek information," said Sylvan. "The High King's forces will retake the seed, and then we can travel there. But for now I must see if anyone in the Order knows aught of Jordell. With luck he might have been here to help in the capital's defense. That is our best hope right now." "Sensible enough," said Oris. "Be careful out there. It's clear our enemies have agents in more places than you thought. If they found us in Drachman, they can find us here." "Well do I know it," said Sylvan. "I will use every caution. You should return to the room and remain with Flip. I would not have you be alone if it can possibly be helped." They finished eating, and then Oris did as Sylvan had bid and returned to the room. Sylvan set out into Garsek streets, drawing up her hood. Refugees now clogged the city. Sylvan did not see anyone wounded, or at least not seriously. She guessed, or hoped, that anyone badly hurt had been moved to safer and warmer places for healing. But anyone who could walk seemed to have simply collapsed upon the cobblestones, finding any place they could rest. Some of them had risen now and were puttering about. There was a deadness in their eyes that Sylvan knew well, the shock of sudden calamity, a shifting in the world so profound that the ordinary mind simply could not withstand it. Only time would heal it for most of them. But Sylvan pushed such thoughts away, determined now to remain focused. Their long while spent in Drachman had made her slip up, letting the enemy discover Oris. She would not make such a mistake again. Sylvan had visited the Mystic Garrison in Garsek many times. Never had she seen its gate closed. The city was the capital of the centermost kingdom of Underrealm, and no one in centuries had dreamed it might be in danger. But now the stronghold was drawn up as if against an invading army, and mystics glared suspiciously down at her as she approached. She raised a hand in greeting as she reached the gate, but no one atop the wall hailed her. Instead, a small hatch slid open in the iron door on the ground. Through the gap appeared the reedy face of a man with a thin wisp of mustache. "We have no room for refugees," he said. "The mayor and his constables will see to your needs." "I am no refugee." Sylvan drew her badge from its pouch at her belt and proffered it. "I have come to report information and to seek it as well." The man barely glanced at the badge before meeting her gaze again. "I do not know you." Sylvan frowned. "I do not know you either. Now are you going to let me in?" "I am not," said the man. "As I said, I do not know you." Sylvan glanced over her shoulder, but no passers-by were close enough to hear. Still, she stepped a bit closer. "Can you not see my badge? Open the door. Who cares if you know my face?" "The Chancellor issued new orders," said the man. "Anyone unknown must be verified by an officer who has been stationed at the garrison for no less than 1 year. Or have you missed that Underrealm is now at war due to traitors the High King once trusted?" Sylvan's fingers tightened on her sword hilts. She was sick nearly to death of everyone in her order, everyone who was supposed to be an ally in battle kindred, showing her nothing but suspicion and scorn. It was just this sort of thing that led her to work only with Jordell unless she had no other choice. She had no time for the politicking and bureaucracy of the Red Cloaks, and Jordell often navigated those treacherous waters so that she did not have to. Control, she told herself. 2 deep breaths. 1, 2, but they came shaky despite her best efforts. The sound of many tramping feet approached her from behind. Sylvan turned quickly, her pulse skipping, yet it was only a party of red-cloaked mystics returning to the garrison. As she peered at them from beneath her hood, one of them gave a great cry and leaped forwards. Sylvan caught only a flash of red hair, trimmed close on the sides and flopping rakishly forwards on top, before the mystic threw her arms around Sylvan in a warm embrace. "Weath," said Sylvan, holding the woman tight against her. "Excuse me." She buried her face in Weath's neck and only with difficulty stopped from crushing her. Weath, for her part, ran her hands up and down Sylvan's back and covered the top of her head with kisses, as though she could not believe her own eyes and was afraid Sylvan would vanish like a dream. "Sylvan, dearest," said Weath, "I have not seen you since Brillig. What under the sky are you doing here? I thought you were still in Dorsey." "I was, and then I was no longer," said Sylvan with a smile. She drew back, and Weath immediately cupped her cheek, staring at her with shining eyes. "It is a relief beyond measure to see you safe. Do they know you here? I cannot get in the gate." They do," said Weath. She turned to the other mystics behind her, who stood nonplussed as they watched the women greeting each other. "Captain, this is Sylvan, a sister of our order. She requires entry to the stronghold. I can vouch for her." The captain was a massively muscled woman with a plain, sleeveless tunic under a leather vest with a collar that rose to cover her neck. She folded her thick arms and gave Sylvan a dour look. "Are you absolutely sure it is her?" Weath blinked. "Oh, I see what you mean." She turned back to Sylvan. "You do not mind if—" "Not at all," said Sylvan, shaking her head. Weath smiled and placed her hands on the side of Sylvan's neck. Suddenly her eyes began to glow. Sylvan felt an itching along her skin where Weath's hands touched her, but she remained still. After a moment it was done. Weath turned back to her captain. "She is no weremage in disguise, Captain. We may trust her." "Very well," said the captain with a sigh. She looked past them both at the guard through the slot in the iron door, who had been watching all this display with increasing irritation. "I can verify this one," she said. "The rest of us are here to report to the Chancellor." "Very well," said the man snippily. "One moment." The hatch screeched shut, and Sylvan heard large latches being turned within. After a moment the door shuddered and then swung inwards. Weath put her arms around Sylvan's shoulders and walked beside her, and Sylvan took one of the woman's hands in hers. Inside the bailey was a tumult of activity. Mystics in full uniform strode back and forth alone, in pairs or in squadrons. Some were at drill, even this early in the morning, though Sylvan was certain they would be of more use out in the streets helping the seat's citizens. But Weath stopped her with a gentle hand on the shoulder and turned back to the others they had entered with. "Captain, might we have a moment to speak alone?" The captain cocked an eyebrow. "A moment or a quarter hour?" Sylvan's jaw clenched, but Weath only smiled. "A moment, no more. She has journeyed far to be here, and—" Suddenly Weath froze, and she looked at Sylvan with wide, fearful eyes. Sylvan frowned. "What is it?" Weath did not answer. She turned back to her captain. "We have things to discuss, of a private matter." A quivering sensation crept through Sylvan's gut, different and worse somehow than the anger that always lurked close to the surface. She could not read this sudden change in Weath's demeanor, but the captain did not seem to notice. She only nodded. "Meet us in the dining hall. The Chancellor shall fetch us from there for our next assignment. A moment only." "I swear it, Captain," said Weath. The captain nodded, and the mystics left. Sylvan turned to Weath, suppressing a frown. "Weath," she said, "what is it?" "Not here," said Weath. "Come, we can be alone in the stables." "I thought you promised your captain you would not be gone too long." Sylvan tried to make it a quip, but nerves turned the words lifeless. Weath only licked her lips and shook her head. No trace of amusement shone in her eyes. Sylvan followed her silently into the stables. The din from the bailey died away as Weath took her towards the back, where there were some chairs for the stable hands. The place was empty now. Weath drew Sylvan into a chair before taking another for herself. "Well, what road brought you here?" said Sylvan. "The last I heard you were stationed at Ammon." Weath gave a smile, but it was a limp thing. "Chancellor Call brought us south. Dormand is here as well." Sylvan's focus grew razor-sharp. "The Chancellor is here?" "No, he returned to Ammon. You must not tell him you saw me." Weath frowned in alarm. "Why ever not?" Sylvan leaned forwards and took her hands. "Please, I beg you to trust me." "Of course I trust you," said Weath, "but can I trust him? What do you fear in him?" "No treachery to the High Crown, at least," said Sylvan bitterly, "but if he learned I am here, he would command me to join him in Ammon. That I could not stomach, especially not with—" She stopped short and shook her head. "I cannot say everything I wish. Only please promise me you will not tell him." "I swear it, then," said Weath. "Of course I swear it, darling." "Thank you." Sylvan realized her grip on Weath's hands had grown too tight, and she loosened it. Weath gave a weak smile of relief. "All right. I came to ask the local chancellor this, but you are even better. I have come seeking news of Jordell. Have you heard anything of him? Has he been pardoned yet? The last I heard, he—" Her words died. Her words died slowly, just as Weath's faint smile did. The quiet... Hey, thanks for the follow. That name? Welcome, welcome. That was quite a username to type into chat. Grab yourself a free ebook at the link I just dropped in chat. That will get you a free copy of my novel Nightblade, the first book of Underrealm, which will get you nice and addicted so that you want to go and read all the rest of them. And you will enjoy the experience. Her words died slowly, just as Weath's faint smile did. The quiet of the stable around them seemed to become total silence until Sylvan heard a faint ringing in her ears. Weath. The woman slid out of her chair and knelt, gently taking Sylvan's face. My dear, I am so sorry. Jordell has fallen. Her voice seemed to be coming through dark water, reaching Sylvan weakly in the depths. Nothing. Then, on the seat? No, not in the battle. It was... She paused for a moment, thinking. It would have been more than 2 months ago now. He died in the Great Rocks. Word reached us not long ago, and from here it has been spreading. No. Wheat's eyes filled with tears. I am sorry. I know you... I wish... She reached up to embrace Sylvan, but Sylvan caught her wrists and held them away. Not harshly, but irresistibly. No, she said again. I have to get away. I cannot be here. I cannot be near her or any of them, not in this place. I have to go. She rose from her chair and strode towards the door. Sylvan, said Weath, following after her. Darling, please, stay here at least a moment. No, away, as far as I can. Sylvan, please, cried Weath. You should not be alone. Do not do anything. I have to go, but she did stop, just for a moment. She looked back at Weath. I have to go, but I swear this. You need not fear for me. Not for me. Weath stopped. She looked terrified and hesitant, but she gave a slow nod. Sylvan whirled and stalked away. The world around her came in flashes. There was the rage, red bloody fingers pushing into her eyes, stinging them like acid, burning, turning to fire in her chest, stoking the flame higher. There was the grief, the stranger, the unwelcome guest in the home of her mind, the hollow pit more frightening than hate. There was Oris, there was Weath's soft neck. She was in the city street, not far enough. How had she left the stronghold? Did they open the door for her, or did she push past them? Closest wall was north, not far enough, not here, not in this place. The city gate stood ahead, and it was closed. And then she was outside it. Did she show them her badge? Don't look back. Farther, not far enough. Was anyone else on the road close by? She could not see them. Was anyone else on the road close by? She could not see them, could not see through the red. The woods, the trees of the birchwood standing around. How far from the city? Not far enough. Nowhere is far enough, but it would have to do. He would want you to control yourself. He would want you to be calm. Do not let go. Do not lose control. Red turned to white, turned to black, to darkness that sank famished teeth into her. Control. He gave you control, and he is gone, she screamed into the uncaring wood. He left you this gift, control. 2 deep breaths. 1. The breath came out in a scream that tore her throat, red to white to black to nothing. She was kneeling. Her head hung low. Spittle dribbled from her lips, and she tasted blood in it, every careful braid undone, blonde hair spilling into the spit, soaking with dirt and filth. Hands clutched to her chest. Hands? She lifted and looked at them. The gloves were shreds. Her knuckles lay open and bleeding. 3 nails had ripped out. Slowly, head shaking with the effort, she looked up and around. Splintered wood. 4 trees ripped and broken on the ground, torn until no piece left was large enough to bother with. One of her swords lying on the ground 2 paces away, the other buried in the trunk of a 5th tree a little farther off. Still the rage, but the familiar red, no white and no black. And now the shame, endless, fathomless, like the very dark below, vast enough to lose herself in 1,000 times over. The shame. What would he think if he could see her? But he could not, and he would not. Never again. Shakily she got to her feet. At first she failed, slipping on the muddy ground. Her face came up caked with it, and she gasped at the cold, at the feeling of the dirt in the battered wreck of her knuckles. At last she rose quivering to her feet. It felt with every step as though her legs would send her crashing down again. She retrieved her swords and returned to the south, but then she thought better of it. She needed to clean herself up before she returned, and she would need to clean the dirt out of her wounds. The shore of the Great Bay was close to the east, and she remembered a stream nearby to the west. She turned east. The salt water would hurt more. Oris waited in their room at the Dancing Fish after Sylvan had left. After a little while, Flip awoke, and together they went into the common room. They ate and then they waited, all the while in silence. There was a pressure upon them both, a weariness and a weight, and Oris suspected that Flip's thoughts were much like her own, reliving the sight of the seat burning and the terror in the city. When 2 hours passed and Sylvan had not yet returned, Oris began to grow worried. She had been gone for long periods before in Drakmund, but the danger now was more present and much more clear. She began to grow nervous as she realized she was sitting here exposed to anyone who happened to come by, something she had never worried about in Drakmund. A thought struck her. What would she do if Sylvan did not return? She did not know what her next step should be. She did not know what to do about any of the madness that had overtaken her life. It was a frightening thought. She could hardly go about proclaiming herself to be the Lifemage and asking people to help her. But just as this trail of thoughts was beginning to spin back in on itself, Sylvan arrived at last. Oris watched her come through the door with a sigh of relief, which cut off the moment she saw Sylvan's face. She looked haggard, as worn as if she had gone a week without rest. As she pushed through the common room towards them, Oris noticed her hands. They were badly bandaged, with white cloth already showing bloodstains beneath. Sylvan? Oris did not remember rising to her feet or clenching her fists. What happened? Who did this to you? She went and wrapped an arm around Sylvan's shoulders, gently guiding her to the table with Flip. The wizard was staring at Sylvan in stark astonishment, and to Oris's surprise, not a little concern. He slid over to make room for her at the table, and as Sylvan stumbled half senseless into a chair, he leaned forwards on his elbows to peer at her. And then, as they both watched her, Sylvan almost seemed to transform before them. Slowly her hunched shoulders straightened, and she sat upright. Her bandaged hands fumbled only slightly as they reached up and tied back her hair, not the intricate braids Oris had grown accustomed to, but a single tail. She then lay her hands flat on the table and met their eyes. My master is dead. A long moment passed. Then Flip stood from his chair. Oris frowned up at him, but Flip ignored her. He went across the room to the bar where the innkeep, Camel, was trying very hard to clean her cups without looking the least bit interested in whatever was going on. Flip leaned over the bar towards her, and Camel glanced up as if she had just noticed him. I don't want there to be less than 2 full bottles of wine on our table at any time for the rest of the day. Understood? He reached into his pocket and scattered what had to be a dozen gold weights on the bar in front of her. Camel gave him a wide-eyed nod. Flip returned to Oris and Sylvan, and Camel was only 2 steps behind him, 3 bottles in her arms. She jogged back to the bar and soon returned with cups. But Oris had turned her attention back to Sylvan. The mystic's gaze had drifted away again, staring at nothing. Oris lifted a hand and almost put it on Sylvan's hand, but placed it on her forearm instead. Sylvan did not seem to notice. She looked still as a stone, but Oris could feel her twitching, the muscles jumping around underneath her skin, as though she was aching to fight anything she could get her hands on. I'm sorry, Sylvan, she whispered. I wish there was anything I could do. We both do, said Flip. He lifted one of the bottles and filled all 3 cups before pushing one towards her. Sylvan glanced down at it. I do not usually drink. Flip whisked it away at once. Foolish of me, I should have asked first. No, said Sylvan. Please, today I want to. She held out her hand. Flip returned her cup, though there was an uncomfortable look in his eye. Is that, please understand, but is that wise? Incredibly, Sylvan gave a small smile. Thank you, but yes, just, please, if it seems like I'm having too much, only stop filling my cup. I will not argue if you do. Of course, said Oris. We're here. We'll watch out for you. Her hand tightened slightly on Sylvan's arm. Then she told the hand to let go, and it obeyed her in its own time. Sylvan lifted the cup, but Flip raised a hand to stop her. To your master, he said, raising his wine and toast, and other beloved in the darkness below. Oris quickly took her cup and lifted it. To Ombi. Sylvan's mouth twisted. To my parents. Oris's heart quailed at that, but she quickly joined in as Sylvan drank deep. Her eyes closed, and Oris watched the curve of her throat shifting as the wine slid down it. When she lowered the cup again, it was empty. She blinked twice and licked her lips. When she pushed the cup forwards, Flip refilled it. I suppose, said Sylvan slowly, I suppose the 2 of you should find your own way from here. What, said Oris, why? I have failed, said Sylvan. I brought you all this way, and it was all for nothing. Flip gave an amused snort. Hardly for nothing. For one thing, we're alive because of you. That's not nothing, at least not from my view. Sylvan gave a little shrug. That may only have delayed the end. Now we are nowhere. I have no plan and no idea where to find one. And the person who did know, who had a plan, he left us a way forward, said Oris. Sylvan looked at her. What? What way? Oris met her gaze. He left us you. Sylvan stared at her without a trace of recognition. I trust you, said Oris, just like he trusted you. You can't tell me he was going to do everything himself, teach me all on his own. He had to have others he could rely on. You have folk you can rely on, too. Here's 2 of them. She pointed at herself and then at Flip. Who else? Who could teach me what I need to do? Slowly, Sylvan's gaze drifted away from her. I suppose there are some I could ask. 1 or 2 who may still be on the seat, if they survive the attack. Then let's find them, said Oris. If there's only one thing I know for certain by now, it's that I'll die if I'm out there on my own. And I don't know who I can trust besides the 2 of you, so I'd be a fool to leave you now. You're fully half the folk whose hands I can place my life in. She smiled fiercely at Sylvan. Besides, I know you want to make someone hurt for what happened to your master, so do it. Turn me into what I'm supposed to be. Sylvan's eyes began to dart back and forth as though she were watching flitting birds that Oris could not see. All right then, who knows if we shall succeed, but I will not stop trying. Here we will rest until folk begin to return to the seat. When they do, we shall return with them, and we shall find a way to help you become the Lifemage and fulfill your destiny. I swear it. Excellent, said Flip, reaching for the wine bottle again. And now to drink too much. Hey, we did it. Oof. Okay. So, that's going to be it for me today. Meaning, time to raid. Let us throw it over to Kahuna. Kahuna Matata. Oh.
Valvoline.
Silence, Twitch ad. Yeah, I'm going to throw it over to Kahuna. Go and give him a nice hello, won't you? We're not even halfway through the final read of the book, which is hard to believe, honestly. But anyway. Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone. Nice to have some folks hanging out while we do this final read-through of the book before publication. Oh, I will be back on tomorrow when we will have to take care of our monthly administration for the month of September. So look forward to that. Lots of fun. And yeah, I hope to see some of you then. And if not, thanks for coming and joining me this morning. And I will see you next time. Bye.
Yep, that's probably the safest. Logan Novel, welcome! Why is that showing up all the way over there?